Welcome to Crime Stories for Sleep. Tonight, before we begin, I want to ask you something simple. Where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Think about that quietly. Let the question settle, and when you're ready, allow yourself to drift into the story. The clock tower struck 11. Its deep bronze voice carrying across empty streets like a gentle reminder that the day had finally surrendered to darkness. In the police station on Maple Street, fluorescent lights hummed, their steady song above rows of metal filing cabinets that stood like silent sentinels in the records room. The air carried the faint scent of old paper and the metallic tang of aged ink, a perfume that spoke of decades of accumulated stories. Officer Martinez had finished her rounds an hour ago, leaving behind only the soft echo of her footsteps in the hallway. Now the building settled into its nocturnal rhythm, the heating system cycling with mechanical precision, the old pipes expanding and contracting in their slow dance of temperature and time. Through the tall windows, streetlights cast amber pools on empty sidewalks. Each circle of light, a small island in the vast ocean of night. The records room stretched back into shadows. Row upon row of cases filed away with methodical care. Each cabinet bore a small white label, years printed in neat black numerals that told the story of time's passage. 1987, 1988, 1989. The numbers marched forward, like soldiers in formation, each representing thousands of hours of investigation, documentation, and quiet administrative work that formed the backbone of law enforcement. In the third cabinet from the window, file folder 1987 to 0234 rested between dozens of others, its manila surface slightly yellowed with age. The case had been closed for 37 years, the paperwork completed with the same careful attention to detail that characterized all police work. Inside the folder, forms were filled out in blue ballpoint pen, each field completed with neat handwriting that spoke of patience and thoroughness. The incident report described a quiet Tuesday morning in March when Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell had called to report strange sounds coming from the abandoned warehouse on Industrial Boulevard. The responding officers had arrived to find broken windows and scattered debris, evidence of trespassers who had long since vanished into the city's sprawling network of alleys and side streets. The case had been logged, investigated, and eventually filed away when no further evidence emerged. But tonight, in the stillness of the records room, that file and thousands of others rested in perfect order, their contents preserved like pressed flowers between the pages of a book. The air conditioning unit hummed softly in the corner, maintaining the precise temperature and humidity levels needed to preserve paper and ink for generations to come. Each document represented someone's story, someone's moment of crisis or concern, carefully documented and stored away in this repository of human experience. The night dispatcher sat at her desk 2 floors above, monitoring radio frequencies that carried the occasional crackle of patrol cars checking in from various corners of the city. Her logbook lay open beside a cup of coffee that had grown cold an hour ago. Entries recorded in precise handwriting that matched the style found in countless reports throughout the building. The rhythm of her work was unhurried, each call logged with methodical care, each detail preserved for future reference. Outside, the city revealed its nocturnal character. Traffic lights cycled through their colors with mechanical regularity, governing empty intersections where no cars waited. The occasional taxi moved through the streets like a yellow ghost, its headlights sweeping across storefronts, protected by metal grates and security cameras that blinked with red electronic eyes. In apartment windows high above, scattered lights suggested the presence of insomniacs, night shift workers, and others who shared the city's wakeful hours. The police station's exterior was lit by a single flood lamp that cast harsh white light across the concrete steps leading to the main entrance. The brass plaque beside the door bore the department's seal and motto, polished to a dull shine by decades of weather and time. Inside, the lobby's tile floor reflected the overhead lights, creating patterns of brightness and shadow that shifted subtly as the building settled on its foundations. Down in the evidence room, shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, each bearing cardboard boxes labeled with case numbers and dates. The boxes contained fragments of stories, photographs, documents, physical evidence, all cataloged and stored according to strict protocols. The room's temperature was kept constant, the humidity controlled, creating an environment where time seemed to move more slowly, where the past could be preserved indefinitely. Box 1987 to 0234 sat on the third shelf from the bottom, its contents relating to the warehouse incident on Industrial Boulevard. Inside, Polaroid photographs showed broken glass scattered across concrete floors, their colors slightly faded but still clear enough to document the scene as it had been found. Evidence tags marked each item with neat handwriting. Dates and times recorded with the precision that defined police work. The warehouse itself still stood on Industrial Boulevard, though it had changed hands several times since that March morning in 1987. Now it housed a furniture distribution company, its interior filled with wrapped sofas and dining room sets waiting for delivery. But in the early morning hours, when the workers had gone home and the building stood empty, shadows fell across the same concrete floors that had once been scattered with broken glass. The building remembered, in its own way, though no human voice spoke of that long-ago incident. The investigating officers from that case had long since retired, their careers documented in personnel files stored in a different section of the records room. Officer Bradley had spent 28 years with the department before moving to Arizona, where he spent his days tending a small garden behind a house with a red tile roof. Officer Chun had remained with the department for 35 years, eventually rising to the rank of sergeant before his retirement celebration in the station's conference room. Surrounded by colleagues who had worked alongside him through decades of calls and cases, their report on the warehouse incident filled 3 pages of careful handwriting, each detail recorded with the thoroughness that characterized their approach to every case. They had photographed the scene, interviewed the reporting party, and searched the surrounding area for additional evidence. When no further leads developed, they had closed the case with the same methodical care they brought to all their work. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, who had made the initial report, had moved from the neighborhood 2 years later, her forwarding address noted in the file for future reference. She had been 63 at the time of the incident, living alone in a house with white shutters and a garden full of roses that bloomed reliably each spring. Her concern for the abandoned warehouse had been genuine, born from years of watching over her neighborhood with the careful attention of someone who understood the importance of small details. The warehouse district where she had lived was quiet even during the day, its streets lined with industrial buildings and the occasional corner store that served the workers, who arrived each morning in pickup trucks and panel vans. At night, the area took on an almost cathedral-like stillness, broken only by the distant sound of freight trains moving slowly through the rail yards that bordered the district to the north. Those trains carried cargo from across the continent, their wheels clicking against rail joints in a rhythm that became part of the night's soundtrack. The engineers who guided those trains through the darkness knew every curve and grade of their routes, their headlights sweeping across empty lots and chain-link fences as they made their way toward distant destinations. Some of them had been making the same run for 20 years or more, their logbooks filled with entries that documented thousands of miles, traveled through the quiet hours when most of the city slept out in the police station. The overnight janitor moved quietly through the hallways, his cart equipped with supplies that maintained the building's institutional cleanliness. His work was methodical and unhurried, each room cleaned according to a routine he had perfected over 7 years of employment. He emptied wastebaskets, mopped floors, and wiped down surfaces with the same careful attention that characterized all the work done within these walls. The janitor had seen many things during his years of night work, though he was careful to respect the confidentiality that surrounded police business. He had cleaned around late-night investigations, mopped floors while detectives worked at their desks, and maintained the building during times of crisis and calm alike. His presence was constant, but unobtrusive, a steady element in the station's nocturnal ecosystem. The building's heating system cycled on as the outside temperature dropped, warm air flowing through ducts that connected every room and office. The furnace in the basement burned with clean blue flames, its operation monitored by sensors and controls that ensured reliable performance throughout the coldest nights. The basement itself was a maze of mechanical rooms, storage areas, and utility spaces that formed the hidden infrastructure supporting the building's daily operations. Among the basement's many rooms was a smaller archive area where the oldest files were stored. Documents dating back to the department's founding in 1923. These files were kept in climate-controlled conditions, their pages protected by acid-free folders and boxes designed to prevent deterioration. The handwriting in these older files spoke of different times, different technologies, but the same careful attention to detail that characterized police work across the decades. File 1923-1 contained the department's first official report, written in fountain pen ink that had faded to a soft brown over the intervening century. The case involved a stolen bicycle, recovered 3 days later from behind Murphy's General Store on what was then called Main Street. The investigating officer's report filled 2 pages with careful script, each detail preserved as clearly as if it had been written yesterday. The bicycle had belonged to Tommy Sullivan, age 12, who had left it outside the post office while he delivered a message for his mother. When he returned, the bicycle was gone, but Mrs. Murphy had noticed it behind her store and assumed someone had simply moved it there for safekeeping. The case was closed when the bicycle was returned to its owner, who promised to be more careful about where he left it in the future. Tommy Sullivan had grown up to become Thomas Sullivan, attorney at law practicing in the same city where he had once lost his bicycle. His office was now located 3 blocks from the police station, in a building that had housed a dry goods store when he was 12 years old. The bicycle incident had become a family story, told at holiday gatherings and dinner parties, a reminder of simpler times and the continuity that connected past and present. The post office where Tommy had left his bicycle was gone now, replaced by a parking lot that served the medical center built in 1967. But the memory of that post office lived on in the police files, preserved in the careful handwriting of officers who had documented its existence as part of their investigation. The building's brick facade had been photographed for the file, showing the hand-painted sign that advertised postal services in simple black letters on white background. These connections between past and present wove through the city like invisible threads, linking stories and lives in ways that only became apparent when viewed from the perspective of archived records. The police files contained thousands of such connections, each case a node in a vast network of human experience that stretched across generations and neighborhoods. The records room, where these files rested, was maintained at exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity levels monitored by digital sensors that recorded readings every hour. The data from these sensors was logged in a computer database that tracked environmental conditions with scientific precision, ensuring that each document would remain legible for decades to come. This dedication to preservation reflected the department's understanding that every case, no matter how small, represented someone's moment of need or crisis outside the station. The city's night shift workers moved through their routines with quiet efficiency. Hospital employees cared for patients in rooms lit by soft bedside lamps, their footsteps muffled by carpet designed to minimize noise during sleeping hours. Security guards made their rounds through office buildings and shopping centers, their flashlights sweeping across empty corridors and darkened storefronts. The newspaper delivery trucks were beginning to load their cargo of fresh papers, bundled and counted for distribution to corner stores and vending machines throughout the metropolitan area. The drivers who would carry these papers through the pre-dawn darkness knew their routes by heart, navigating by landmarks that had guided them through hundreds of similar mornings. At the fire station, 6 blocks from police headquarters, firefighters slept in narrow beds arranged with military precision, their equipment checked and ready for immediate response. The station's watch officer sat at a desk similar to the one used by the police dispatcher, monitoring radio frequencies and maintaining logbooks that documented the quiet periods between emergency calls. These various agencies operated in parallel throughout the night, their radio traffic occasionally intersecting when incidents required coordinated response. The dispatchers who managed these communications spoke in calm, professional voices that cut through static and distance to coordinate the city's emergency services with practiced efficiency. The police station's communications center occupied a windowless room on the second floor, its walls lined with radio equipment and computer terminals that connected the building to patrol cars, other agencies, and the state law enforcement network. The overnight dispatcher sat surrounded by technology that would have seemed miraculous to the officers who had written reports with fountain pens in 1923. But the fundamental purpose remained unchanged: to document, communicate, and coordinate the work of law enforcement. The dispatcher's logbook lay open beside her computer keyboard, its lined pages filled with entries that recorded the night's routine activities. Each entry was time-stamped and signed, creating a permanent record of communications and decisions made during the overnight hours. The book's pages were numbered sequentially, ensuring that no information could be lost or misplaced. In a desk drawer beside the logbook, the dispatcher kept a small collection of pens, pencils, and other supplies needed for her work. Among these items was a rubber stamp bearing the department's official seal, used to mark documents that required authentication. The stamp's ink pad had been replaced 6 times since the dispatcher began her current assignment, each replacement documented in a maintenance log that tracked even the smallest details of equipment care. The rubber stamp had been used thousands of times to mark reports, forms, and other documents that passed through the communications center. Each impression left the department's seal on paper, a small but important mark that verified the authenticity and official nature of police records. The seal itself featured an eagle with spread wings, surrounded by text that identified the city and department name in letters that had been carefully designed for clarity and dignity. This attention to detail in even the smallest elements of police work reflected a tradition of professionalism that stretched back to the department's founding. Every form, every stamp, every piece of equipment had been selected and maintained according to standards that emphasized reliability, accuracy, and respect for the important work being performed. The filing system used throughout the station had been refined over decades of use, with color-coded folders and numerical systems that allowed any document to be located quickly and efficiently. Each case file contained a master sheet that summarized the incident, followed by detailed reports, photographs, and supporting documentation arranged in chronological order. The master sheets were typed on forms, designed specifically for police use, with fields for date, time, location, officers assigned, and case status. These forms had been redesigned 3 times since 1950, each revision reflecting advances in administrative efficiency and changing needs of the department. The current version had been in use since 1998, its layout familiar to every officer and staff member in the building. Behind each master sheet, individual reports were arranged with the most recent on top, creating a reverse chronological sequence that allowed investigators to quickly review the most current information about any case. Supporting documents were attached with metal clips that would not rust or deteriorate over time, ensuring that each file remained intact regardless of age. The photograph sections of case files were protected by clear plastic sleeves that prevented fingerprints and moisture from damaging the images. These photographs ranged from crime scene documentation to evidence photos to identification pictures, each labeled with information that connected it to specific aspects of the case. The labeling system used small white stickers with typed text, applied with the same careful precision that characterized all aspects of file. Maintenance. Some files contain dozens of photographs, particularly those involving complex investigations or serious crimes. Other files held only a single image, perhaps a picture of recovered property or a simple documentation shot. But each photograph was treated with equal care, protected and preserved according to standards that ensured its availability for future. Referenced out the evidence photographs in file. 1987-234 showed the warehouse interior as it had appeared on that March morning, with broken glass scattered across concrete floors and debris piled in corners where trespassers had left traces of their presence. The lighting in these photos revealed details that might have been missed by casual observation. Shadows and textures that helped document the scene's condition. One photograph showed a section of wall where someone had spray-painted graffiti in red letters, the paint still wet enough to drip slightly when the picture was taken. Another image captured footprints in dust near a broken window, their outline preserved in the camera's flash for future analysis. These details, documented with systematic thoroughness, created a permanent record of conditions that had long since changed. The warehouse had been cleaned and renovated several times since 1987, its interior now painted in neutral colors and equipped with modern loading docks and office spaces. The concrete floors had been sealed and polished, their surface now reflecting fluorescent lights and bearing the marks of forklifts and pallet jacks rather than scattered debris and broken glass. But in the police files, the warehouse remained frozen at that moment of discovery, its condition preserved in photographs and written descriptions that would outlast any future renovations or changes of ownership. This preservation of moments in time formed one of the essential functions of police documentation, creating an archive of the city's history that extended far beyond criminal activity to include countless glimpses of daily life and urban change. The officers who had investigated the warehouse incident had written their reports with this permanence in mind, knowing that their words might be read decades later by people seeking to understand what had happened during that long ago morning. Their descriptions included details that might have seemed unnecessary at the time but could prove valuable to future investigators or researchers studying patterns of urban development and change. Officer Bradley's portion of the report noted the warehouse's construction details, describing brick walls and steel beam supports that spoke of early 20th century industrial architecture. He had measured the building's dimensions and recorded the street address with precision that would allow future readers to locate the structure even if the surrounding neighborhood changed beyond recognition. Officer Chun's section focused on the evidence of trespass, cataloging items left behind and documenting the methods used to gain entry. His measurements of broken windows and damaged doors created a technical record that could be used to estimate repair costs or identify patterns that might connect to other cases. This systematic approach to documentation reflected training that emphasized thoroughness over speed, accuracy over convenience. The written statements taken from Mrs. Hartwell filled 2 pages of the case file, her words recorded verbatim in the careful handwriting that characterized police interviews of that era. She had described the sounds that prompted her call as scraping and banging, like someone moving heavy things around inside. Her statement included the time she had first noticed the sounds, the duration of the disturbance, and her reasons for believing the building should have been empty. Mrs. Hartwell had lived in her house on Industrial Boulevard for 18 years at the time of the incident, long enough to become familiar with the normal patterns of activity in her neighborhood. She knew which buildings housed active businesses and which stood empty, which sounds were part of the area's routine and which suggested something unusual. Her decision to call the police reflected this accumulated knowledge and her sense of responsibility for the community's welfare. The house where Mrs. Hartwell had lived still stood on Industrial Boulevard, though it had been converted to office space in 1994 when the residential character of the neighborhood began changing to accommodate commercial development. The roses she had tended in her front garden were gone, replaced by a small parking area and professional landscaping that required minimal maintenance. But in the police files, Mrs. Hartwell's garden lived on in the background details of Officer Bradley's report, which noted well-maintained residential property with flower garden as part of his description of the reporting party's address. These incidental details, recorded without particular emphasis, created a rich tapestry of neighborhood life that would become increasingly valuable as the city continued to evolve. The phone call that brought Mrs. Hartwell's concerns to police attention had been logged by the department's day dispatcher, whose neat handwriting filled the communication record with precise times and message details. The call had come in at 9:23 a.m. on a Tuesday. The caller's voice described as elderly female, very polite, concerned but not alarmed. The dispatcher's notes indicated that Mrs. Hartwell had provided her full name and address without prompting, suggesting familiarity with proper procedures for reporting incidents to police. This communication record, like thousands of others, rested in its own filing system within the records room, creating a parallel archive of every call received by the department. The communication files were cross-referenced with case files through a numbering system that allowed researchers to trace the path of any incident from initial report through final disposition. The day dispatcher who had taken Mrs. Hartwell's call had worked for the department for 12 years, handling thousands of phone calls that ranged from genuine emergencies to routine requests for information. Her training emphasized the importance of treating every call with equal professionalism, regardless of the apparent significance of the reported incident. This approach ensured that situations like Mrs. Hartwell's warehouse discovery received proper attention and documentation. The patrol car assigned to respond to the warehouse call had been Unit 7, driven by Officer Bradley with Officer Chun as his partner. Their vehicle was a blue and white Ford sedan equipped with radio communication, emergency lighting, and the basic investigative supplies needed for routine patrol work. The car's daily maintenance log showed that it had been serviced and inspected according to department protocols, ensuring reliable performance during all assigned duties. Unit 7's route to the warehouse took the officers through 3 different neighborhoods, their travel documented in the vehicle's activity log with times and locations recorded for administrative purposes. The log showed that they had arrived at the scene 12 minutes after receiving the dispatch, a response time that met department standards for non-emergency calls. The officers' approach to the warehouse investigation followed standard procedures for property checks, beginning with an exterior survey that documented all visible signs of disturbance or unauthorized entry. They had photographed the building from multiple angles, creating a visual record that complemented their written descriptions of the scene's condition. Their search of the building's interior had been conducted with flashlights, supplementing the natural light that entered through broken windows. The beam patterns from their flashlights were visible in some of the evidence photographs, creating bright circles that illuminated specific details while leaving surrounding areas in shadow. These lighting effects added an unintentional artistic quality to the technical documentation, transforming routine police photography into images that captured the atmosphere of discovery and investigation. The officers had spent 47 minutes at the scene, their thorough examination documented in activity logs that recorded every aspect of their investigation. They had tested doors and windows for signs of forced entry, measured tire tracks in the parking area outside, and collected samples of the spray paint used for graffiti inside the building. These samples, stored in small evidence containers, had been tagged and logged according to protocols that ensured proper chain of custody. The paint samples joined thousands of other pieces of physical evidence stored in the basement evidence room. Each item carefully cataloged and preserved for potential future analysis. The evidence room's inventory system tracked every item from initial collection through final disposition, creating an unbroken record of custody and location that could satisfy legal requirements for authenticity and reliability. Items were checked in and out using a computer system that replaced the handwritten logs used in earlier decades. But the fundamental principles of evidence management remained unchanged. Each evidence container bore multiple labels that identified the case number, collection date, collecting officer, and item description in both human-readable text and machine-readable barcodes. This redundant labeling system prevented errors and ensured that evidence could be located and identified even if individual labels became damaged or illegible over time. The paint samples from the warehouse investigation had never been analyzed, since no suspect was identified and no similar cases developed that might have provided comparison materials. But the samples remained available in their containers, preserved against the possibility that future developments might make analysis worthwhile, or that academic researchers might find value in studying the materials. As examples of 1980s graffiti practices, this preservation of potentially useful materials reflected the department's understanding that the true value of evidence might not become apparent until years or decades after collection. Items that seemed insignificant during initial investigation could prove crucial to solving related cases or understanding broader patterns of criminal activity. The warehouse case had been classified as unfounded after the investigation revealed no evidence of actual criminal activity, but the file remained in the active system for 5 years before being transferred to long-term storage. This retention period allowed for the possibility that additional information might emerge that would warrant reopening the investigation. During those 5 years, the file had been referenced twice by officers investigating similar reports of disturbances in abandoned buildings. Neither of these subsequent cases showed any clear connection to the warehouse incident, but the cross-referencing process demonstrated the systematic approach that characterized the department's analytical methods. The first reference came in 1989, when Officer Martinez investigated a break-in at an empty factory building 6 blocks from the warehouse. Her review of similar cases had identified the 1987 incident as potentially related, leading her to examine the evidence, photographs, and witness statements for any patterns that might connect the two events. Officer Martinez's comparison found several similarities between the cases, including the type of graffiti found at each scene and the apparent method of entry used by the trespassers. However, the 2-year gap between incidents and the lack of physical evidence connecting them prevented any definitive conclusion about whether the same individuals were involved. The second reference occurred in 1991, when Detective Harrison was assigned to investigate a series of vandalism incidents affecting industrial properties throughout the city. His systematic review of past cases included examination of the warehouse file, which he included in a statistical analysis designed to identify patterns in location, timing, and methods used by vandals. Detective Harrison's analysis revealed that vandalism of abandoned industrial buildings followed seasonal patterns, with incidents peaking during late spring and early fall when weather conditions made extended stays inside empty buildings more comfortable. This information proved useful for planning patrol coverage and advising property owners about periods of increased risk. The Detectives' work also identified specific construction features that made buildings attractive targets for trespassers, including easy access to upper floors, multiple exit routes, and interior spaces large enough to accommodate group activities. These insights helped property owners implement more effective security measures and guided officers in prioritizing their patrol activities. The analytical approach pioneered by Detective Harrison became standard practice for the department, with specialized software eventually replacing the manual chart-making and statistical calculations he had performed with calculator and graph paper. But the fundamental principle remained the same. Systematic review of past cases could reveal patterns and insights that improved both investigation and prevention efforts. Detective Harrison had retired in 2003 after 31 years with the department, his career spanning the transition from typewritten reports to computer databases, from film photography to digital imaging, from manual filing systems to electronic records management. His experience bridged multiple eras of police work, providing continuity and institutional memory that proved invaluable during periods of technological change. The detective's personnel file, stored in a different section of the records room, documented his progression through various assignments and his contributions to the department's analytical capabilities. His performance evaluations consistently praised his attention to detail and his ability to identify patterns that other investigators might miss. Among Detective Harrison's most significant contributions was his development of a cross-referencing system that connected cases based on geographic proximity, physical evidence similarities, and temporal patterns. This system, initially maintained on index cards and filing cabinets, eventually evolved into the computer database that currently supported the department's investigative activities. The warehouse case file that Detective Harrison had studied in 1991 now resided in the electronic system he had helped design, its details searchable by keywords, dates, locations, and dozens of other criteria that could reveal connections across decades of police work. The physical file remained in its Manila folder, but its information lived simultaneously in digital form that could be accessed instantly from any terminal in the building. This dual existence of information, physical and digital, archived and accessible, characterized the modern police station's relationship with its own history. The building housed both cutting-edge technology and century-old filing cabinets, both fiber optic networks and handwritten logbooks, both digital cameras and evidence photographs that bore the distinctive colors of 1980s film processing. The night air outside carried the scent of rain that had fallen earlier in the evening, leaving the streets with a washed, clean smell that mixed with the urban perfume of concrete, asphalt, and the metal oxidation that came from the industrial district to the north. The temperature had dropped to 56 degrees, cool enough to bring comfort, but not cold enough to drive people indoors completely. A few blocks from the police station, the all-night diner on Commerce Street served coffee and simple meals to shift workers and insomniacs who found solace in the restaurant's bright lighting and steady supply of conversation. The diner's windows glowed with warm fluorescent light, creating a beacon of activity in the otherwise quiet neighborhood. Inside the diner, the night cook worked with practiced efficiency, preparing orders that would sustain the city's overnight workers through the remaining hours until dawn. His movements were economical and precise, each task performed with the skill that came from years of repetition and pride in craft. The diner's customers included nurses finishing their shifts at nearby hospitals, security guards taking breaks from their rounds, and the occasional police officer who stopped for coffee during routine patrol activities. These interactions created an informal network of communication that helped maintain awareness of neighborhood conditions and potential concerns. The diner had been serving the community for 38 years. Its continuity providing a stable reference point in a neighborhood that had undergone significant changes during the intervening decades. The original owner had retired in 1995, selling to a family that maintained the restaurant's commitment to quality food and service while updating equipment and decor to meet contemporary standards. The police officers who frequented the diner appreciated not only the food and coffee but also the opportunity to interact with community members in a relaxed setting that fostered positive relationships. These informal contacts often provided information that proved valuable for community policing efforts and crime prevention activities. The diner's presence in the neighborhood represented one of many threads that connected the police station to the broader community it served. The officers who worked from the building understood that effective law enforcement required partnership with citizens who shared responsibility for maintaining safe and healthy neighborhoods. This philosophy of community partnership was reflected in department policies that encouraged officers to spend time in local businesses, attend neighborhood meetings, and participate in community events that built trust and communication between police and residents. The approach had evolved significantly since the days when police work focused primarily on responding to crimes after they occurred. The warehouse investigation of 1987 represented an earlier era of policing, when community reports like Mrs. Hartwell's were investigated primarily for their immediate law enforcement implications. The officers had done excellent work documenting the scene and following proper procedures, but they had not been trained to consider the broader community context that might have provided additional insights into the incident. Contemporary investigations would likely include interviews with nearby business owners, analysis of patterns and similar reports, and consultation with community development specialists who might identify underlying conditions that contributed to property abandonment and vandalism. This broader approach reflected understanding that crime prevention required attention to environmental and social factors as well as traditional law enforcement activities. The warehouse building itself had benefited from this evolved approach to community policing, with the property's eventual renovation and reuse supported by partnerships between police, city planning officials, and private developers who recognized the value of maintaining productive use of industrial properties. The furniture distribution company that now occupied the warehouse employed 47 people in jobs that ranged from warehouse operations to office administration to delivery services. These employees had become part of the neighborhood's daily rhythm, their presence helping to maintain the natural surveillance that discouraged criminal activity. The company's operations required coordination with delivery trucks that arrived throughout the day, creating legitimate activity that helped distinguish normal business operations from suspicious behavior. This legitimate activity made it easier for police officers and community members to identify situations that warranted closer attention or investigation. The transformation of the warehouse from abandoned property to productive business represented the kind of positive change that community policing efforts sought to encourage. The building's rehabilitation had removed a potential magnet for criminal activity, while providing employment and services that strengthened the neighborhood's economic foundation. But in the quiet hours of the night, when the furniture company's employees had gone home and the building stood dark and empty, the warehouse retained echoes of its earlier incarnation as a source of community concern. The security lighting that now illuminated its parking area cast shadows that shifted with the movement of clouds across the moon, creating patterns of light and darkness that reminded observant viewers that buildings, like neighborhoods, were constantly evolving entities that required ongoing attention and care. The police officers who patrolled Industrial Boulevard during overnight shifts were aware of the warehouse's history. Their knowledge gained through briefings that included information about past incidents and current property status. This awareness informed their patrol activities, helping them recognize normal conditions and identify situations that might warrant closer investigation. The patrol car that passed the warehouse twice each night during routine rounds was the descendant of Unit 7, which had responded to Mrs. Hartwell's call 37 years earlier. The current vehicle was equipped with computer terminals, GPS navigation, digital cameras, and communication systems that would have seemed miraculous to Officers Bradley and Chun. But its fundamental purpose remained unchanged: to maintain police presence in the community and respond to situations that required law enforcement attention. The officers who operated this patrol car had been trained in techniques and technologies that reflected decades of advancement in law enforcement methods. But they also carried forward the traditions of thoroughness, professionalism, and community service that had characterized police work since the department's founding in 1923. Their patrol logs were now maintained electronically, but they served the same documentary function as the handwritten records that had been used in earlier eras. Each significant observation, each call for service, each interaction with community members was recorded with the same attention to detail that had produced the careful reports found in case file 1987 to 0234. The continuity of purpose that connected past and present police work was embodied in the building itself, which had been designed and constructed to support law enforcement activities across multiple generations of officers and staff. The records room that housed the warehouse case file had been planned with expansion, space that allowed for decades of accumulating documentation, while the evidence storage areas had been designed with environmental controls that would preserve physical materials for legal and historical purposes. The building's architectural features reflected understanding that police work created permanent records that required careful preservation and management. The high ceilings, reinforced floors, and climate control systems represented investments in infrastructure that would support the department's mission for generations to come. As the clock tower struck midnight, its bronze voice carrying across the same empty streets that had heard its call for more than a century, the police station settled deeper into its nocturnal routine. The overnight dispatcher updated her logbook with routine entries that documented the quiet progress of time. While in the records room below, thousands of case files rested in their carefully maintained environment, each preserving its own fragment of the city's ongoing story. The morning of March 15th, 1987 had begun with Sergeant Williams arriving at the station at 6:15 a.m., 30 minutes before his official shift started. He carried with him a thermos of coffee and the quiet satisfaction that came from punctuality, a trait that had served him well during 16 years of police work. His first task, as always, was to review the overnight reports that waited in a neat stack on his desk, each one typed on department letterhead and signed by the officers who had completed them. Report number 19870234 lay third in the stack, its pages aligned with the precision that characterized all official police documentation. The report form itself was a marvel of administrative design, with numbered fields for every conceivable piece of information that might prove relevant to an investigation. Field 1 requested the date and time of the incident. Field 2 asked for the reporting party's name and address. Field 3 required detailed description of the complaint or observation that had prompted police response. Officer Bradley had completed Field 3 with a methodical thoroughness that defined his approach to report writing. His typewriter had produced clean, even letters that spelled out Mrs. Hartwell's concerns about unusual sounds emanating from the abandoned warehouse at 1247 Industrial Boulevard. The description included not only what she had heard, but when she had first noticed the sounds, how long they had continued, and her assessment of why they seemed unusual for that location at that time of day. The typewriter used for this report was a Smith Corona electric model that had been purchased by the department in 1984, part of a modernization effort that had replaced the manual typewriters used since the 1950s. The electric models produced more consistent letter spacing and required less physical effort from officers who often spent hours at their desks completing paperwork. The machine's ribbon had been changed 3 weeks before the warehouse report was typed, ensuring that each letter appeared with sharp, dark clarity that would remain legible for decades. Field 4 of the report form required officers to document their response time and arrival conditions. Officer Bradley had noted that Unit 7 had been dispatched at 9:25 a.m. and had arrived at the scene at 9:37 a.m. A 12-minute response that fell well within department standards for non-emergency calls. His description of arrival conditions included weather information, lighting conditions, and traffic factors that might have affected the investigation. The weather on March 15th had been partly cloudy with temperatures in the mid-50s, conditions that Officer Bradley noted as clear visibility, dry pavement, light wind from the northwest. These details might have seemed unnecessary for a routine property check, but department training emphasized the importance of documenting all environmental factors that could influence an investigation or affect the credibility of officer observations. Field 5 requested a detailed narrative of actions taken during the investigation. This section of the report stretched across 2 full pages, with Officer Bradley's account beginning at the moment Unit 7 had parked outside the warehouse and continuing through the completion of the scene examination and departure from the location. Each action was recorded in chronological order, with specific times noted for significant developments during the investigation. The officers had approached the building from the street side, walking along a concrete sidewalk that showed signs of recent repair work where utility crews had excavated to access underground cables. Officer Bradley noted these construction details because they represented recent changes to the scene that might have created opportunities for unauthorized access or altered the normal pattern of activity around the building. The warehouse's main entrance was secured with a heavy steel door that showed no signs of tampering or forced entry. Officer Bradley had tested the door's lock mechanism and found it functioning properly, with no scratches or other marks that might indicate attempted break-in. The door's paint was weathered but intact, suggesting that any entry to the building had been gained through alternative means. The officers had circled the building's perimeter, examining each door and window for evidence of disturbance. This examination revealed 3 windows on the north side that had been broken, apparently by thrown rocks or similar projectiles. Officer Bradley's measurements indicated that the broken windows were approximately 8 feet above ground level, requiring either climbing ability or the use of tools to reach them from outside. Glass fragments scattered inside the building beneath. The broken windows suggested that the damage had been inflicted from outside rather than from within. Officer Bradley had photographed these glass patterns using a 35mm camera loaded with color print film, ensuring that the evidence would be preserved regardless of future changes to the scene. Field 6 of the report form was designated for evidence collected during the investigation. Officer Bradley listed 4 items: glass samples from the broken windows, soil samples from footprints found inside the building, a section of spray-painted wall that had been documented photographically, and measurements of the damaged areas. Each evidence item was assigned a number that corresponded to tags attached to the physical materials stored in the evidence room. The evidence tags themselves were small manila cards with printed lines for case number, item description, collecting officer, date, and time. These cards were filled out in ballpoint pen using the same careful handwriting. that characterized all aspects of police documentation. The tags were attached to evidence containers using string that was knotted in specific pattern that would reveal any tampering with the sealed items. Glass samples from the warehouse windows were stored in small paper envelopes designed specifically for evidence collection. The envelopes bore printed warnings about maintaining chain of custody and included spaces for multiple signatures documenting each person who handled the materials. Officer Bradley had signed the initial collection notation, with Sergeant Williams adding his signature when the evidence was logged into the department's inventory system. Field 7 required a summary of witness statements taken during the investigation. Officer Bradley had interviewed Mrs. Hartwell at her residence, a white frame house with green shutters located approximately 200 yards east of the warehouse. Her statement had been recorded verbatim in a spiral-bound notebook that officers carried for this purpose, with each page numbered sequentially to prevent alteration or removal of information. Mrs. Hartwell's statement began with basic identifying information: her full name, address, telephone number, age, and relationship to the incident. She had provided this information readily, demonstrating familiarity with police procedures that suggested previous cooperation with law enforcement investigations. Her manner during the interview was described as cooperative and forthcoming, with good attention to detail and reliable memory of events. The substance of Mrs. Hartwell's statement filled 3 pages of the officer's notebook, with her account of the unusual sounds presented in her own words, rather than summarized or paraphrased. She had first noticed the sounds at approximately 8:45 a.m. while working in her kitchen, which faced toward the warehouse building. The sounds were described as heavy scraping, like furniture being moved across a concrete floor, followed by metallic banging that echoed inside the building. Mrs. Hartwell explained that she was familiar with the normal sounds from the warehouse district, having lived in her current residence for 18 years. The abandoned warehouse typically generated no sounds at all, making the morning's activity particularly noticeable. She had watched the building for several minutes before deciding that the sounds were significant enough to warrant police attention. Her statement included details about previous incidents involving the abandoned warehouse, including occasions when she had observed teenagers gathering in the parking area and instances when she had noticed vehicles parked near the building during evening hours. These observations, while not directly related to the morning's incident, provided context that helped officers understand the location's history and Mrs. Hartwell's level of familiarity with normal conditions. Field 8 of the report form was designated for documentation of physical evidence found at the scene. Officer Bradley's description of the warehouse interior filled nearly 2 pages, with careful attention to details that might prove significant in future investigations. The building's main floor consisted of approximately 4,000 square feet of open space, with concrete flooring that showed wear patterns from previous industrial use. The spray-painted graffiti found inside the building was documented with precise measurements indicating its location relative to the main entrance and its height above floor level. The graffiti consisted of letters and symbols painted in red aerosol paint, with some characters approximately 6 inches tall and others reaching heights of 12 inches. Officer Bradley had noted that the paint appeared fresh, with sharp edges and bright color that suggested recent application. Footprint evidence was found in dust that had accumulated near the broken windows, with impressions indicating at least 2 different individuals had been present inside the building. The footprints were photographed using a ruler placed alongside for scale reference, and Officer Bradley had made plaster casts of the clearest impressions for potential future comparison with suspect footwear. The plaster casting process was documented in detail within the report, including the type of plaster used, the mixing ratio, the setting time, and the ambient temperature during the casting process. These technical details ensured that the evidence would meet legal standards for Authenticity and reliability if it were ever presented in court proceedings. Field. 9 required officers to document any unusual circumstances or conditions that might affect the investigation. Officer Bradley noted that the warehouse had been vacant for approximately 2 years, according to information provided by Mrs. Hartwell and confirmed through observation of the building's condition. The lack of recent maintenance was evident in accumulated debris, weather damage to exterior surfaces, and the general appearance of abandonment. The absence of security measures at the warehouse was noted as a factor that might have contributed to the trespassing incident. No security cameras were visible on the building or surrounding property, and no signs warning against unauthorized entry were posted at access points. This lack of security infrastructure made it difficult to determine when the trespassing had occurred or whether it represented an isolated incident or part of a pattern of unauthorized activity. Officer Bradley's report included recommendations for the property owner regarding security improvements that might prevent future incidents. These recommendations were based on department guidelines for crime prevention through environmental design, a concept that recognized the role of physical conditions in either encouraging or discouraging criminal activity. Field 10 was designated for follow-up actions required to complete the investigation. Officer Bradley listed 3 specific tasks: notification of the property owner about the trespassing incident, consultation with patrol supervisors about increased surveillance of the area, and coordination with the detective division regarding any similar incidents that might suggest a pattern of related activity. The property owner notification process required research to identify current ownership and contact information for the warehouse building. This research was conducted using city records maintained by the assessor's office, with property ownership information dating back to the building's original construction in 1952. The current owner was listed as Morrison Industrial Properties, a company based in the state capital that managed several abandoned or underutilized industrial buildings. Officer Bradley's phone call to Morrison Industrial Properties was documented in supplemental report that detailed the conversation with company representative Janet Morrison, who expressed concern about the trespassing incident and requested regular updates about any future problems at the pen. LOCATION. Ms. Morrison indicated that the company was considering options for either renovating the building for new tenants or selling the property to developers interested in alternative uses. Field 11 required documentation of any coordination with other agencies or departments that might have been involved in the investigation. The warehouse incident was classified as a local matter that did not require notification of state or federal authorities, but Officer Bradley noted that he had consulted with the city building inspector regarding safety concerns related to the broken windows and potential hazards for future trespassers. The building inspector's assessment was documented in a separate report that became part of the case file, with detailed observations about structural conditions, electrical systems, and other factors that might affect public safety. The inspector's recommendations included securing the broken windows to prevent weather damage and installing temporary barriers to discourage unauthorized entry until permanent security measures could be implemented. Field 12 was designated for case disposition and follow-up requirements. Officer Bradley classified the warehouse incident as unfounded for criminal prosecution purposes, since no suspects had been identified and no evidence suggested ongoing criminal activity. However, the case remained open for administrative purposes to allow for coordination with property owner security improvements and monitoring for similar incidents. The administrative closure process required approval from Sergeant Williams, who reviewed the entire case file before signing the disposition form. His review included examination of all evidence documentation, witness statements, and follow-up actions to ensure that the investigation had been conducted according to department standards and that all required procedures had been completed. Sergeant Williams' approval signature was accompanied by a brief notation indicating his assessment of the investigation's thoroughness and his recommendations for any additional actions that might be warranted. His comments praised Officer Bradley's attention to detail and noted that the case file provided an excellent example of proper documentation procedures for property-related incidents. Completed report was forwarded to the Records Division for filing and indexing, a process that ensured the information would be available for future reference by investigators working on related cases. The indexing system used multiple categories to classify each report, including geographic location, type of incident, evidence collected, and agencies involved. Report 1987 to 0234 was indexed under several categories: trespassing, commercial property; vandalism, industrial district; witness statement; civilian cooperation; and evidence collection, physical materials. These index entries allowed future investigators to locate the report when researching patterns of similar activity or when seeking examples of proper investigative procedures. The carbon copies of the report were distributed according to department protocol, with one copy retained in the active case file, one copy forwarded to patrol supervision for review, and one copy sent to the Detective Division for inclusion in analytical databases used to identify crime patterns and trends. The Detective Division's review of the warehouse report was conducted by Detective Harrison, who was responsible for analyzing property-related crimes throughout the industrial district. His review focused on comparing the incident with similar cases to determine whether the trespassing might be part of a larger pattern of activity affecting abandoned buildings in the area. Detective Harrison's analysis revealed 3 other incidents involving abandoned industrial properties within a 2-mile radius of the warehouse, all occurring within the previous 6 months. While these cases shared some similarities with the warehouse incident, differences in timing, methods of entry, and types of damage suggested that they represented separate incidents rather than the work of a coordinated group. The analytical process used by Detective Harrison involved creating detailed comparison charts that documented the characteristics of each incident side by side. These charts included information about dates, times, weather conditions, types of buildings involved, methods of entry, evidence found, and witness observations. The systematic comparison helped identify both similarities and differences that might not be apparent when examining individual cases in isolation. Detective Harrison's analysis was documented in a supplemental report that became part of each related case file, creating cross-references that would help future investigators understand the broader context of individual incidents. This analytical approach reflected the department's understanding that effective law enforcement required attention to patterns and trends rather than simply responding to isolated events. The warehouse case file eventually grew to include 17 different documents, ranging from the original incident report to follow-up correspondence with the property owner to analytical reports from the Detective Division. Each document was date-stamped and signed by the person responsible for its creation, creating a chronological record of all activities related to the investigation. The file folder that contained these documents was manufactured specifically for law enforcement use, with reinforced construction and acid-free materials designed to prevent deterioration over time. The folder's tab was labeled with the case number using a typewriter font that matched the department's standard documentation format. ensuring consistency in the filing system. Mrs. Hartwell's witness statement, written in Officer Bradley's careful handwriting, occupied 4 pages within the case file. Her words were recorded verbatim, with quotation marks indicating her exact phrasing and brackets, used to clarify meanings or provide additional context. The statement concluded with her signature and the date, creating a legal record of her cooperation with the investigation. The witness statement process followed procedures designed to ensure accuracy and reliability, with officers trained to record information exactly as provided, without interpretation or editorial comment. Mrs. Hartwell had been given the opportunity to review the written statement before signing it, confirming that it accurately reflected her observations and concerns. About the warehouse incident, her statement included not only her account of the morning's events but also background information about her familiarity with the neighborhood and her reasons for believing that the sounds from the warehouse were unusual. This contextual information helped establish her credibility as a witness and provided investigators with a better understanding of normal conditions in the area. The technical aspects of report writing were governed by department policies that specified everything from the type of pen to be used for handwritten entries to the format for typing dates and times. These standardized procedures ensured that reports from different officers would be consistent in appearance and organization, making them easier to review and analyze. Officer Bradley's typing skills were evident in the evenness of his letter spacing and the consistent alignment of text within the report form's printed fields. His use of correction fluid to fix typing errors was minimal and neat, demonstrating the care he took to produce professional-looking documents that reflected well on the department's standards. The report's technical accuracy extended to details such as the correct spelling of street names, the precise format for expressing times and dates, and the proper abbreviations for official titles and agencies. This attention to detail reflected training that emphasized the importance of accuracy in all aspects of police documentation. The warehouse reports evidence section documented not only what was collected but also what was observed but not collected, providing a complete record of all potential evidence at the scene. This comprehensive approach ensured that future investigators would understand the full scope of available evidence and the decisions made about what materials to preserve. Officer Bradley's photographs of the warehouse interior were taken using a camera technique designed to provide maximum detail while maintaining accurate color representation. The camera's settings were documented in his report, including film type, aperture, shutter speed, and lighting conditions, information that would help establish the authenticity and accuracy of the photographic evidence. The film used for evidence photography was a professional grade, color negative stock chosen for its archival stability and color accuracy. After processing, the negatives were stored in acid-free sleeves within climate-controlled conditions that would preserve them for decades without deterioration. Each photograph was numbered sequentially and accompanied by a caption that described what was shown in the image and its relationship to the overall investigation. These captions were typed on labels that were attached to the back of each print, creating a permanent record that would remain with the photographs regardless of how they might be stored or displayed in the future. The evidence room where the warehouse case materials were stored maintained detailed logs of every item's location, condition, and chain of custody. These logs were updated whenever evidence was removed for examination or when new materials were added to the case file, creating an unbroken record of accountability for all physical evidence. The storage conditions for different types of evidence were carefully controlled, with glass samples kept in dry conditions to prevent contamination. photographic materials stored in cool, dark environments to prevent fading, and plaster casts maintained in padded containers to prevent breakage. Officer Bradley's plaster casts of the footprint evidence were stored in custom-made boxes with foam padding that protected them from shock and vibration. Each cast was labeled with permanent markers that identified the case number, location where found, date of collection, and collecting officer, ensuring that the evidence could be properly identified even if separated from its documentation. The chain of custody documentation for each piece of evidence included signatures from every person who handled the materials, dates and times of all transfers, and descriptions of any examinations or tests performed. This meticulous record-keeping ensured that the evidence would meet legal standards for admissibility. If the case ever proceeded to court, the warehouse investigation's thoroughness was representative of the department's approach to all cases, regardless of their apparent significance or likelihood of prosecution. This consistent standard of professionalism reflected training that emphasized the importance of treating every incident with equal care and attention to detail. Officer Bradley's career with the department spanned 28 years, during which he completed thousands of similar reports with the same methodical attention to accuracy and completeness. His personnel file documented consistently high performance ratings and commendations for his investigative skills and report writing abilities. The skills required for effective police report writing were taught in academy training programs that emphasized clarity, accuracy, and legal admissibility. Officers learned to organize information logically, document observations objectively, and present findings in formats that would be useful to supervisors, prosecutors, and other members of the criminal justice system. The evolution of report writing technology from manual typewriters to electric models to computer-based systems had changed the mechanics of documentation, but not the fundamental principles of accuracy and thoroughness that guided police work. Each technological advancement was adopted only after careful evaluation of its impact on the quality and reliability of police records. The warehouse case file represented one of approximately 12,000 reports completed by the department during 1987, each following the same standards of documentation and analysis that characterized Officer Bradley's work. This volume of cases created an enormous archive of information about community conditions, crime patterns, and police activities that proved valuable for both operational and historical purposes. The storage and management of these thousands of case files required sophisticated systems for organization, retrieval, and preservation. The department's records management procedures had evolved over decades to accommodate increasing volumes of documentation while maintaining the accessibility and integrity that made the information useful for ongoing police work. The warehouse report's journey from initial incident to final filing reflected the systematic approach that characterized all aspects of police administration. Each step in the process was governed by established procedures that ensured consistency, accuracy, and accountability in the handling of official records. Reports' influence extended beyond its immediate investigative purpose to become part of the institutional memory that guided future police responses to similar situations. Officers who reviewed the case file gained insights into effective investigation techniques and documentation procedures that improved their own professional capabilities. The time required to complete the warehouse investigation and its associated paperwork totaled approximately 8 hours of officer time, including scene examination, evidence collection, witness interviews, report writing, and administrative processing. This investment of resources reflected the department's commitment to thorough Investigation of all reported incidents. Cost-effectiveness of this thorough approach was demonstrated by the prevention of future problems that might have resulted from inadequate initial investigation. The detailed documentation enabled effective coordination with property owners and other agencies, helping to address underlying conditions that contributed to the original incident. The warehouse reports. Classification as unfounded for criminal prosecution purposes did not diminish its value as a record of police response to community concerns. The file provided evidence of the department's responsiveness to citizen reports and its commitment to maintaining public safety through proactive investigation of potential problems. The administrative systems that process the warehouse report had been designed to handle the complexities of modern police work while maintaining the personal attention to detail that characterized traditional law enforcement approaches. This balance between efficiency and thoroughness ensured that important information was preserved, while allowing officers to manage increasingly heavy caseloads. Quiet satisfaction that Sergeant Williams felt when reviewing Officer Bradley's completed report reflected his appreciation for work performed according to the highest professional standards. The report represented not just the documentation of a single incident, but the continuation of a tradition of excellence that defined the department's approach to all its responsibilities. As the morning sun climbed higher above the city, casting longer shadows through the station's windows, the warehouse report took its place among the thousands of other documents that recorded the department's ongoing efforts to serve and protect the community. The file would rest in the records room, its information preserved and available, a testament to the careful work that formed the foundation of effective law enforcement. The basement archive stretched beneath the police station like a hidden city, rows upon rows of filing cabinets extending into shadows that seemed to swallow the overhead lighting. Here, in the controlled climate of 68 degrees and 40% humidity, the oldest cases rested in perfect order, their manila folders aged to the color of autumn leaves. The air moved slowly through filtration systems that removed dust and pollutants, creating an atmosphere where time moved differently, where decades compressed into the space between one filing cabinet and the next. Mrs. Dorothy Chen had worked in the archives for 23 years, her quiet footsteps marking a daily journey through corridors lined with the accumulated memory of the city. She arrived each morning at 7:30, her key ring soft against her hip, carrying coffee in a thermos that had accompanied her through thousands of similar mornings. Her desk occupied a small alcove near the main entrance to the archive area, surrounded by reference books and cataloging systems that had guided her careful work since the Reagan administration. The filing system that Mrs. Chun maintained had evolved over 7 decades, beginning with simple alphabetical arrangements and growing into a complex network of cross-references, numerical codes, and subject classifications that could locate any case within minutes of a request. Each cabinet bore metal labels that identified its contents by year and case number range, while colored dots indicated special categories such as violent crimes, property offenses, or cases involving juveniles. Cabinet 1987 contained cases numbered 1 through 0500. Its drawers sliding on ball bearings that had been lubricated quarterly for 37 years. The warehouse case, file 1987 to 0234, occupied its assigned position between cases involving a bicycle theft and a noise complaint, its thickness modest compared to the expanded folders that held major investigations. The file's edges showed slight discoloration from handling over the years, but the documents inside remained crisp and legible, protected by the acid-free folders that had been standard since 1975. The metal filing cabinets themselves were manufactured by Shaw Walker Company of Muskegon, Michigan, their steel construction designed to withstand decades of daily use while protecting their contents from fire, water, and unauthorized access. Each cabinet weighed approximately 400 pounds when fully loaded, requiring careful attention to floor load limits and seismic anchoring that would prevent toppling during earthquakes. Mrs. Chun's knowledge of the archive contents was encyclopedic, built through years of filing, retrieving, and occasionally reading the cases that passed through her hands. She remembered the warehouse case because it had been one of her first assignments when she transferred from the patrol division to archives duty, and she had been impressed by Officer Bradley's thorough documentation and clear writing style. The warehouse file had been accessed 17 times since its initial filing, each retrieval documented in a logbook that Mrs. Chun maintained for statistical purposes and security tracking. The file had been consulted by Detective Harrison during his 1991 analysis of vandalism patterns, reviewed by Academy instructors seeking examples of proper report writing, and examined by researchers studying urban development patterns in the industrial district. Each access to the file required a formal request form that documented the requesting party, the purpose of the review, and the duration of time the file would be absent from its storage location. These request forms were filed in their own separate system, creating a secondary archive that tracked the continuing usefulness of closed cases for ongoing investigations and administrative purposes. Request forms themselves told stories of the warehouse case's ongoing relevance to police work and community understanding. Detective Harrison's 1991 requested noted his interest in identifying patterns of vandalism affecting abandoned industrial properties for crime prevention purposes. An Academy instructor's 1995 request sought examples of thorough property investigation, documentation for training purposes. A graduate student's 2003 request described research into community policing approaches to property abandonment issues. Mrs. Chun had personally retrieved the warehouse file for each of these requests, walking through the archive aisles with practiced efficiency, her fingers finding the correct folder among thousands without hesitation. The process of retrieval was almost meditative, requiring attention to detail and respect for the systematic organization that made the archives functional. The archive area occupied nearly 2,000 square feet of basement space, with 14-foot ceilings that accommodated the tall filing cabinets and provided room for the ventilation systems that maintained proper environmental conditions. The concrete floors were painted with industrial epoxy that could be easily cleaned and would not generate dust that might contaminate stored documents. Fluorescent lighting fixtures were arranged in parallel rows above the filing aisles, their ballasts replaced on a preventive maintenance schedule that ensured consistent illumination throughout the space. The lighting was designed to provide adequate visibility for file retrieval while minimizing heat generation that might affect the archive's temperature control systems. The environmental control systems maintain conditions that would preserve paper documents for centuries if necessary, with temperature fluctuations limited to plus or minus 2 degrees and humidity variations controlled within a 5% range. Backup systems ensured that environmental conditions would be maintained even during power outages or equipment failures. Mrs. Chun's daily routine included checking temperature and humidity readings from multiple locations throughout the archive area, recording these measurements in logbooks that provided historical data about environmental conditions. These measurements had revealed subtle patterns related to seasonal changes, building occupancy, and equipment performance that helped optimize the preservation conditions. The oldest files in the archive dated to 1923. Their paper yellowed with age but still legible, thanks to the high-quality materials used for official documents during that era. These early files were stored in specially designed cabinets with additional protection against environmental fluctuations and physical handling that might damage fragile materials. Case 1923-001, the department's first official report, resided in a custom-made archival box within a climate-controlled cabinet that maintained even stricter environmental standards than the general archive area. The file had been microfilmed for preservation purposes, but the original documents remained available for examination by authorized researchers and historians. The early files revealed fascinating glimpses of police work during the city's smaller, simpler era, when officers wrote reports by hand and investigations might involve walking from house to interview neighbors. The language of these reports was formal but personal, reflecting the close relationships between police and community members that characterized law enforcement in smaller communities. File 1923-0047 documented a case involving stolen chickens from the McReady farm on what was then called County Road 12, now known as the busy commercial thoroughfare of West Side Boulevard. The investigating officer had walked from the police station to the farm, a distance of nearly 3 miles, to examine the empty chicken coop and interview Mr. McReady about his missing poultry. The stolen chickens case had been solved within a week when the birds were discovered in a makeshift coop behind the Jameson house on Pine Street. The investigation revealed that young Billy Jameson had taken the chickens as a prank, intending to return them after frightening his neighbor. The case was resolved when Billy's father paid Mr. McReady for the trouble and ensured that the chickens were properly returned to their original home. Mrs. Chen had read through many of these early cases during quiet periods in the archive, finding in them a sense of continuity that connected past and present police work. The fundamental principles remained the same: thorough investigation, careful documentation, and fair resolution of community problems, even as the methods and technology had evolved dramatically. The progression from handwritten reports to typewritten documents to computer-generated files was visible throughout the archive, creating a technological timeline that paralleled the city's development from small agricultural community to modern metropolitan area. Each era had its own characteristics in terms of paper quality, ink composition, and formatting standards. The typewritten reports of the 1940s and 1950s showed the influence of military precision that many officers brought from their service in World War II and Korea. These reports were characterized by concise language, systematic organization, and attention to details that reflected military training in observation and documentation. File 1953-0891 contained the investigation of a burglary at Henderson's 5 and Dime store on Main Street, a case that demonstrated the methodical approach that characterized post-war police work. The investigating officer had created detailed sketches of the crime scene, measured distances between key pieces of evidence, and interviewed 12 witnesses with questions designed to establish precise timelines and identify potential suspects. The burglary investigation had required 3 weeks to complete, with the stolen merchandise eventually recovered from a storage shed behind the suspect's residence on Oak Street. The case file included photographs of the recovered items arranged on tables in the police station, each piece of merchandise tagged with evidence numbers that corresponded to the store's inventory records. Mrs. Chun particularly appreciated the thoroughness of these mid-century investigations, which often included information that modern readers found surprisingly detailed. The Henderson's burglary file contained not only standard police reports, but also insurance claims, witness statements, character references for the suspect, and correspondence with the district attorney's office regarding prosecution decisions. The suspect in the Henderson's case had been Thomas Kowalski, age 19, who had recently returned from military service and was struggling to find employment in the post-war economy. The file revealed that his burglary had been motivated by desperate financial circumstances rather than criminal intent, leading to a plea agreement that emphasized restitution and community service rather than imprisonment. Thomas Kowalski's story, preserved in the police files, showed how individual cases connected to broader social and economic conditions that affected entire communities. His military service record, included in the case file, documented honorable service in the Pacific Theater, while employment office records showed his unsuccessful attempts to find work that would support his young family. The resolution of the Hendersons case reflected the community-oriented approach that characterized small-town policing, with officers serving as much as social workers as law enforcement agents. The case file included letters from community members who vouched for Kowalski's character and offered employment opportunities that would help him rebuild his life after the burglary incident. Mrs. Chun had traced Thomas Kowalski's later life through other documents in the archives, finding references to his eventual success as a contractor who specialized in home construction during the suburban development boom of the 1960s. His company had built dozens of houses in the neighborhoods that surrounded the police station, creating a legacy that extended far beyond his youthful mistake. The 1960s files reflected the social changes that transformed American communities during that turbulent decade, with police reports documenting everything from civil rights demonstrations to anti-war protests to the emerging drug culture that challenged traditional law enforcement approaches. These files provided unique insights into how local communities experienced national social movements. File 1967-1205 contained reports from a peaceful civil rights demonstration that had taken place in the city's downtown square, with approximately 200 participants calling for equal employment opportunities in local businesses. The police response had focused on traffic control and ensuring public safety rather than confrontation, reflecting the department's commitment to protecting constitutional rights while maintaining order. The demonstration files included photographs that captured both the dignity of the protesters and the professionalism of the police response, with officers maintaining respectful distances while monitoring the event for potential problems. The file also contained correspondence with demonstration organizers who had worked with police to ensure that the event proceeded safely and legally. These civil rights era files revealed the complexity of police work during periods of social change, when officers were required to balance competing demands for order and justice while maintaining neutrality in politically charged situations. The files showed how individual officers navigated these challenges while upholding their professional responsibilities. Mrs. Chin found particular meaning in file 1968-0445, which documented the department's response to news of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. The file contained reports of community meetings where police and civil rights leaders worked together to prevent the violence that erupted in other cities, demonstrating the value of ongoing dialogue and mutual respect between law enforcement and community groups. The 1970s brought new challenges documented in files that dealt with environmental concerns, energy crises, and changing social attitudes about family, work, and community responsibility. These files showed how police work expanded beyond traditional crime fighting to include community problem solving and social service functions. File 1974066-7 documented the investigation of complaints about pollution from the Riverside chemical plant, a case that required police to coordinate with environmental agencies and health departments that were still developing expertise in addressing industrial contamination issues. The case file included scientific reports, citizen complaints, and correspondence with regulatory agencies that eventually led to cleanup efforts. The chemical plant investigation demonstrated how police work was evolving to address complex issues that required specialized knowledge and interagency cooperation. The file showed officers learning about environmental science, air quality monitoring, and public health assessment as they worked to address community concerns about industrial pollution. Mrs. Chin appreciated how these files revealed the dedication of officers who took on new responsibilities without additional training or resources, driven by their commitment to protecting community welfare. The chemical plant case showed officers spending their own time learning about environmental issues so they could effectively investigate citizen complaints. The 1980s files, including the warehouse case that Mrs. Chun knew so well, reflected the technological changes that were beginning to transform police work. Computer databases were replacing card files. Electronic communication was supplementing radio and telephone systems, and scientific analysis was becoming more sophisticated and reliable. File 19851133 contained one of the first investigations that used computer analysis to identify patterns in a series of burglaries affecting elderly residents in the Riverside neighborhood. The investigation required officers to learn new data analysis techniques while maintaining their traditional investigative skills, creating a blend of old and new approaches that characterized police work during this transitional period. The computer analysis had revealed timing patterns and geographic clusters that had not been apparent through traditional investigation methods, leading to the arrest of suspects who had been systematically targeting vulnerable elderly residents. The case marked a turning point in the department's adoption of analytical tools that would become standard in later decades. Mrs. Chen had witnessed this technological evolution firsthand, learning to use computerized cataloging systems while maintaining the manual filing methods that ensured backup access to critical information. Her work bridged the gap between old and new approaches, preserving the best aspects of traditional methods while embracing the efficiency of modern technology. The archive's organization reflected this evolution, with newer files maintained in both physical and electronic formats, while older files remained in their original paper form but were gradually being digitized for preservation and accessibility. This dual system ensured that no information would be lost while taking advantage of technological improvements. The microfilm collection occupied an entire wall of the archive area, with thousands of reels containing photographic copies of documents that were too fragile for regular handling or too valuable to risk losing to fire or flood. The microfilm readers required special training to operate, but they provided access to documents that might otherwise be inaccessible. Mrs. Chen had become expert in using the microfilm systems, spending hours carefully threading reels and adjusting focus to provide clear images of decades-old documents. The work required patience and attention to detail, qualities that she had developed through years of archive management. Microfilm process itself was documented in files that showed how the department had systematically preserved its historical records using the best technology available during each era. Early microfilming efforts used equipment that produced images of varying quality, while later systems created consistently clear copies that would last for centuries. The preservation efforts extended beyond simple storage to include conservation treatments for documents that showed signs of deterioration. Papers that had become brittle with age were treated with chemicals that neutralized acid content, while documents with damaged margins were reinforced with archival tape that would not cause further deterioration. Mrs. Chun worked closely with conservation specialists who visited the archives quarterly to assess the condition of stored materials and recommend treatment for items that showed signs of degradation. These specialists had developed techniques for preserving everything from fountain pen ink to carbon paper copies to early computer printouts. The conservation work required careful documentation of treatments applied to each document, creating secondary files that tracked the preservation history of important records. These conservation files ensured that future archivists would understand what treatments had been applied and when additional intervention might be necessary. The daily environment within the archives was one of profound quiet, broken only by the soft whisper of air circulation systems and the occasional rustle of papers being handled with archival gloves. Mrs. Chun worked in this silence for hours at a time, finding in it a peacefulness that contrasted sharply with the busy activity of the police station above. Visitors to the archives often commented on the sense of timelessness that pervaded the space, as if the accumulation of so many stories and records had created an atmosphere where past and present coexisted. Mrs. Chun had grown comfortable with this atmosphere, finding in it a connection to the continuity of police work across generations. The physical act of filing documents had become almost meditative for Mrs. Chun, requiring just enough concentration to maintain accuracy while allowing her mind to appreciate the historical significance of the materials she handled. Each file represented someone's crisis, someone's resolution, someone's moment of intersection with the formal systems of law and order. The warehouse case file, which Mrs. Chun had handled dozens of times over the years, had become familiar in its details but retained its significance as an example of thorough police work. The file's modest thickness belied its importance as a teaching tool and reference point for understanding proper investigative procedures during quiet periods in the archives. Mrs. Chun sometimes found herself reading through cases that had caught her attention during filing or retrieval activities. These reading sessions were unofficial but tolerated by supervisors, who understood that archive staff needed to understand the content of materials they were responsible for maintaining. Her reading had revealed fascinating patterns across decades of police work, showing how certain types of cases appeared repeatedly but with variations that reflected changing social conditions and law enforcement approaches. Property crimes remained constant, but the methods used by both criminals and investigators evolved with technology and social change. Warehouse case represented a particular type of incident that appeared regularly throughout the archives, reports of suspicious activity that led to investigations of property conditions and community concerns. These cases showed police serving as community problem solvers as much as crime fighters, addressing issues that affected neighborhood stability and quality of life. Mrs. Chun had identified more than 100 similar cases spanning 6 decades, each involving abandoned or underutilized properties that attracted unwanted activity. The files showed how police responses to these situations had evolved, from simple trespass enforcement to comprehensive approaches that addressed underlying conditions contributing to property problems. The evolution was visible in the increasing complexity of case files, with later investigations including consultations with building inspectors, social services, property management companies, and community development agencies. This multi-agency approach reflected growing understanding that property problems required coordinated solutions rather than simple law enforcement responses. The archive's role in supporting this analytical work was crucial, providing access to historical patterns that informed current decision-making and policy development. Mrs. Chun took pride in maintaining systems that made this historical perspective available to officers and administrators who needed to understand long-term trends and patterns. Filing system had been refined over decades to maximize both storage efficiency and retrieval speed, with color-coded labels, numerical systems, and cross-reference indices that allowed any requested file to be located within minutes. Mrs. Chun could navigate the system automatically, her movements through the archive aisles guided by muscle memory developed through thousands of repetitions. The physical layout of the archives had been designed with both function and preservation in mind, with wide aisles for safe movement of personnel and equipment, adequate lighting for document examination, and environmental systems that maintained preservation quality conditions throughout the space. Every aspect of the design prioritized the long-term protection of stored materials. Climate monitoring systems recorded temperature and humidity data every 15 minutes, creating detailed records that tracked environmental conditions over time and provided early warning of equipment problems that might threaten document preservation. Mrs. Chun reviewed these monitoring reports daily, watching for trends that might indicate the need for system adjustments or maintenance. The backup systems included battery-powered emergency lighting, auxiliary climate control equipment, and water detection sensors that would trigger alarms if flooding threatened the archive area. These systems reflected understanding that the documents stored in the archives represented irreplaceable historical resources that justified significant investment in protection measures. Fire suppression systems used halon gas rather than water sprinklers, preventing the water damage that could destroy paper documents, while effectively controlling fires that might threaten the archive contents. The halon systems required special training for archive staff, who needed to understand evacuation procedures and safety protocols for gas suppression. Activation. Mrs. Chun had participated in quarterly fire drills that tested both evacuation procedures and emergency response protocols, ensuring that archive staff could respond effectively to various types of emergencies. These drills emphasized the importance of human safety while also addressing procedures for protecting vital records during emergency situations. Security systems that protected the archives included card access controls, motion detectors, and surveillance cameras that monitored all areas where sensitive documents were stored. Access to the archives was restricted to authorized personnel, with detailed logs maintained of all entries and exits from the secured areas. Mrs. Chun's security clearance had been renewed annually for 23 years, with background investigations that verified her continued reliability and trustworthiness in handling sensitive law enforcement records. The clearance process reflected the serious responsibility involved in maintaining police archives that contained information about ongoing investigations and personal details about community members. The warehouse case file, like thousands of others in Mrs. Chun's care, represented more than simple documentation of past events. It embodied the careful work of dedicated professionals who understood that their efforts created lasting records of community life and law enforcement service that would inform and guide future generations. As afternoon light filtered through the high basement windows, casting long shadows between the filing cabinets, Mrs. Chun continued her quiet work of preservation and organization. Her efforts ensured that the stories contained in thousands of case files would remain available to serve the ongoing needs of law enforcement, historical research, and community understanding. The endless archive stretched around her, filled with the accumulated wisdom and experience of decades of police work. Each file a testament to the commitment and professionalism that characterized the department's service to the community. In the controlled silence of this underground repository, the past lived on, carefully preserved and respectfully maintained for whatever future needs might arise. Asterisk. The courthouse stood 6 blocks east of the police station, its limestone facade weathered to a soft gray that absorbed the city's light and shadow with equal dignity. Built in 1934 during the depths of the Great Depression, the building had witnessed thousands of cases flow through its chambers, each leaving invisible traces in the marble corridors and oak-paneled courtrooms, where justice was pursued with patient deliberation. At 3 in the morning, the courthouse rested in perfect stillness, its halls empty except for the night security guard who made his rounds every 2 hours, his footsteps echoing against terrazzo floors that had been polished weekly for 90 years. The building's heating system cycled quietly through its overnight program, maintaining a steady, 65 degrees that protected the law books and case files stored throughout the structure. Courtroom 3A occupied the building's second floor. Its tall windows facing west toward the industrial district where the warehouse case had originated 37 years earlier. The courtroom had never heard arguments about the warehouse incident, since no charges had been filed. But the space embodied the potential destination for every police investigation that gathered sufficient evidence to warrant prosecution. Judge's bench in courtroom 3A was carved from a single piece of Missouri oak, its surface darkened by decades of use and careful maintenance. Behind the bench hung portraits of judges who had served the community since the courthouse opened, their formal poses capturing the solemnity and responsibility that characterized judicial service across multiple generations. The witness stand, adjacent to the judge's bench, had been refinished 12 times since 1934, each restoration preserving the original craftsmanship while maintaining the functionality required for contemporary court proceedings. The Bible used for swearing witnesses had been rebound 6 times. Its leather cover soft with handling, but its pages crisp and readable. The jury box contained 12 chairs arranged in 2 rows, each chair numbered with small brass plates that had been polished weekly by courthouse maintenance staff for decades. The chairs themselves had been reupholstered in 1987, the same year as the warehouse investigation, with fabric chosen for durability and comfort during long trials that might extend for weeks. The public gallery behind the bar contained 24 wooden benches arranged in 4 rows, their surfaces worn smooth by families, friends, and community members who had gathered to witness the administration of justice. The wood had absorbed decades of whispered conversations, quiet prayers, and the occasional outburst of emotion that accompanied verdicts in significant cases. The acoustics of courtroom 3A had been carefully designed to ensure that every word spoken from the witness stand or attorney podiums could be heard clearly throughout the space. The plaster ceiling contained subtle curves and angles that directed sound waves toward the jury box and gallery while minimizing echo and distortion that might affect the clarity of testimony. Court reporter Margaret Walsh had worked in courtroom 3A for 18 years, her stenotype machine capturing every word spoken during proceedings with the precision that characterized her professional commitment to creating accurate records. Her workstation occupied a position near the witness stand that provided clear sight lines to all participants while allowing unobstructed access to her equipment. The stenotype machine that Mrs. Walsh operated was a stenograph model that had been purchased in 1995, its mechanical precision requiring regular maintenance and calibration to ensure accuracy in recording the rapid speech that characterized many court proceedings. The machine's output was simultaneously recorded on paper tape and stored electronically, creating redundant records that protected against data loss. Mrs. Walsh's skill with the stenotype machine was the product of years of training and practice, her fingers moving across the keyboard with fluid precision that captured not only words, but also the emotional nuances and timing that gave meaning to spoken testimony. Her transcripts became part of the permanent court record, preserved in files that paralleled the police archives in their commitment to historical accuracy. The court clerk's office adjacent to courtroom 3A maintained files for every case that had been heard in the chamber, with records dating back to the courthouse's opening in 1934. These files contained pleadings, motions, orders, and transcripts that documented the legal proceedings associated with thousands of criminal and civil cases. File cabinets in the clerk's office were arranged chronologically and by case type, with color-coded labels that allowed staff to locate specific records quickly and efficiently. The filing system had been refined over decades to accommodate increasing caseloads while maintaining the accuracy and accessibility that characterized effective court. Administration. The case files contained not only legal documents, but also evidence exhibits, photographs, and supporting materials that had been presented during trials. These materials were stored according to strict protocols that ensured their preservation and protected their integrity for potential appeals or future reference. Exhibit. Storage areas in the courthouse basement contained thousands of items that had been presented as evidence in criminal cases, each piece carefully tagged and cataloged according to systems that ensured proper chain of custody and prevented loss or contamination. The storage areas were climate-controlled and secured against unauthorized access. The basement also housed the building's mechanical systems, including heating and cooling equipment that maintained comfortable conditions throughout the courthouse year-round. The mechanical rooms were accessed only by authorized maintenance personnel who followed strict protocols for system inspection and repair. Security systems throughout the courthouse included metal detectors at public entrances, surveillance cameras in all common areas, and panic buttons in each courtroom that could summon immediate assistance during emergencies. These systems reflected understanding that courthouses needed protection against various threats while remaining accessible to the public. The holding cells adjacent to courtroom 3A were used for defendants who were in custody during trial proceedings, providing secure but humane conditions for individuals awaiting their court appearances. The cells contained basic furnishings and were monitored continuously by court security officers. Each holding cell measured 8 feet by 6 feet, with concrete walls painted in neutral colors that created a calm environment, while maintaining the security requirements for detaining individuals who might pose flight risks or safety concerns. The cells were cleaned daily and inspected weekly to ensure they met standards. For humane detention, the courthouse's architectural details reflected the civic pride and commitment to justice that characterized its construction during the Depression era, when public buildings were designed to embody democratic values and inspire confidence in governmental institutions. Every element, from the carved stone facades to the hand-forged hardware, spoke of permanence and dignity. The main entrance hall contained a marble memorial listing the names of local residents who had died in military service, beginning with World War I and continuing through contemporary conflicts. The memorial was illuminated by skylights that cast changing patterns of light and shadow throughout the day, creating a contemplative atmosphere that honored sacrifice and service. The law library on the courthouse's 3rd floor contained thousands of volumes documenting legal precedents, statutes, and regulations that guided judicial decision-making. The library served attorneys, judges, and law students who needed access to legal authorities for case preparation and research. Librarian Robert Martinez had maintained the legal collection for 15 years, ensuring that the most current authorities were available while preserving historical materials that might be needed for cases involving older legal issues. His work required both legal knowledge and library science expertise to organize materials effectively. The library's reading room provided quiet spaces for legal research, with tables and chairs arranged to facilitate concentration while allowing natural light from tall windows to supplement electric lighting. The room's atmosphere encouraged the careful study and contemplation that characterized effective legal preparation. Many of the cases that had been tried in courtroom 3A originated from investigations documented in the police archives that Mrs. Chun maintained 6 blocks away. The warehouse case represented one type of investigation that might have led to courthouse proceedings if evidence had supported criminal charges. The connection between police investigations and court proceedings was embodied in the secure transport procedures that moved defendants, evidence, and witnesses between the police station and courthouse for trial proceedings. These procedures ensured continuity and security while maintaining the integrity of the judicial process. The county jail occupied a separate building 2 blocks south of the courthouse, its modern design reflecting contemporary understanding of correctional practices while maintaining the security requirements for housing individuals awaiting trial or serving sentences for misdemeanor offenses. Deputy Sheriff Patricia Coleman had worked at the jail for 12 years, supervising housing units that accommodated up to 200 inmates in conditions that emphasized both security and human dignity. Her work required constant attention to safety, health, and legal requirements that governed correctional operations. The jail's design incorporated direct supervision principles that placed correctional officers in constant visual contact with inmates, reducing tensions and conflicts while enabling immediate response to medical emergencies or security incidents. The approach required specially trained staff who could maintain authority, while treating inmates with respect and professionalism. Each housing unit in the jail contained individual cells arranged around a common day room, where inmates could interact during authorized periods. The cells provided privacy and security, while the day room facilitated supervised social interaction that helped maintain mental health during periods of confinement. The medical facility within the jail was staffed by nurses and physicians who provided healthcare services to inmates, ensuring that confinement did not compromise access to necessary medical treatment. The facility included examination rooms, a pharmacy, and isolation areas for individuals with communicable diseases. Mental health services at the jail were provided by counselors and psychiatrists who assessed inmates' psychological needs and provided treatment for conditions that might affect their ability to participate in legal proceedings. These services reflected understanding that many individuals in the criminal justice system suffered from mental health issues that required professional attention. The jail's visitation areas allowed family members and attorneys to meet with inmates under supervised conditions that maintained security while preserving important personal and legal relationships. The areas were designed to facilitate communication while preventing the introduction of contraband or security threats. Educational programs at the jail provided opportunities for inmates to work toward high school equivalency certificates or develop job skills that might help them succeed after release. These programs reflected research showing that education and training reduced recidivism rates and helped individuals transition successfully back to community life. The jail's kitchen prepared 3 meals daily for the inmate population, with menus designed by nutritionists to meet dietary requirements while accommodating various health conditions and religious restrictions. Food service staff followed strict protocols for food safety and security that prevented contamination and unauthorized access. Laundry facilities at the jail processed uniforms, bedding, and personal clothing according to schedules that ensured sanitary conditions while managing the logistical challenges of serving a large population with limited resources. The laundry operation required specialized equipment and procedures to handle potentially contaminated materials safely. The jail's administrative offices maintained detailed records of every individual processed through the facility, including booking information, housing assignments, medical records, and disciplinary actions. These records were integrated with court systems and law enforcement databases to ensure accurate tracking and communication. Booking procedures at the jail followed standardized protocols that documented the personal information, charges, and physical condition of each person admitted to the facility. The process included fingerprinting, photographing, and medical screening that protected both individual and public health. The fingerprinting process used electronic scanners that created digital records integrated with state and federal databases, allowing rapid identification and background checks that informed decisions about housing assignments and security precautions. The technology represented significant advancement over the ink-based methods used in earlier decades. Photograph procedures created identification records that were used throughout the individual's involvement with the criminal justice system, from initial booking through court proceedings to potential sentencing. The photographs were taken according to standards that ensured consistency and quality. For identification purposes, medical screening during booking identified health conditions that might require immediate attention or affect housing decisions, such as communicable diseases, mental health issues, or medication requirements. The screening process protected both the individual being booked and other inmates and staff. Property storage procedures documented and secured personal belongings that inmates were not allowed to retain in their cells, ensuring that items were properly maintained and returned upon release. The storage system prevented loss while maintaining security against contraband introduction. The jail's communication systems allowed inmates to make authorized phone calls to family members and attorneys while monitoring conversations for security purposes, except for legally privileged communications with legal counsel. The system balanced individual rights with institutional security requirements. Legal visits at the jail were conducted in private rooms that protected attorney-client privilege while maintaining visual supervision for security purposes. These facilities ensured that confinement did not interfere with individuals' constitutional rights to legal representation. The jail's release procedures verified court orders and ensured that individuals were discharged only when legally authorized, with protocols that prevented accidental early releases while facilitating timely processing of legitimate discharge orders. The procedures required multiple verification steps and supervisory approval. Transportation between the jail and courthouse was provided by specially equipped vehicles operated by trained deputies who ensured security during movement of individuals to court proceedings. The transportation system coordinated with court schedules to minimize delays while maintaining safety for all participants. The courthouse's holding areas received individuals transported from the jail for court appearances with secure processing. Areas that maintained custody while allowing preparation for legal proceedings. These areas included consultation rooms where defendants could meet privately with their attorneys. The integration between jail, courthouse, and police station created a comprehensive system for processing criminal cases from initial investigation through final disposition. Each facility played a specialized role while coordinating with others to ensure effective and fair administration of justice. The physical buildings that housed this system were designed and maintained to support their critical functions while reflecting community values about justice, security, and human dignity. The architecture and operations of each facility embodied decades of experience and evolution in criminal justice practices. The courthouse's courtrooms had witnessed thousands of cases since 1934, each proceeding contributing to the development of legal precedents and community understanding of justice. The physical space had remained largely unchanged, but the cases heard within its walls reflected evolving social conditions and legal standards. Courtroom 3A had hosted trials ranging from simple misdemeanors to complex felonies, with each case requiring careful attention to legal procedures and evidence presentation. The courtroom's design facilitated these proceedings while maintaining the dignity and formality that characterized judicial processes. The judges' chambers adjacent to Courtroom 3 provided private spaces where judges could review cases, meet with attorneys, and prepare for proceedings without interruption. The chambers contained law books, reference materials, and computer terminals that supported judicial decision-making. Judge Patricia Morrison had presided over Courtroom 3A for 8 years, bringing to her work experience as a prosecutor and private attorney that informed her understanding of legal issues and courtroom procedures. Her approach emphasized fairness, efficiency, and respect for all participants in the judicial process. The court reporter's transcripts from Judge Morrison's courtroom became part of the permanent record that documented legal proceedings for appeals, research, and historical purposes. These transcripts were produced according to standards that ensured accuracy and completeness in recording spoken testimony and legal arguments. The bailiff assigned to standards that ensured accuracy and completeness in recording spoken testimony and legal arguments. The bailiff assigned to spoken to standards that ensured accuracy and completeness in recording spoken testimony and arguments. Courtroom 3A was responsible for maintaining order and security during proceedings, while assisting the judge with administrative tasks and evidence handling. The position required both law enforcement skills and understanding of court procedures. Bailiff James Martinez had worked in various courthouse assignments for 14 years, developing expertise in courtroom security and procedure that helped ensure smooth operation of legal proceedings. His presence provided reassurance to participants, while maintaining the authority necessary for effective court operations. The public defender's office in the courthouse basement provided legal representation for defendants who could not afford private attorneys, ensuring that constitutional rights to counsel were protected regardless of economic circumstances. The office handled hundreds of cases annually with limited resources and dedicated staff. Public defender Sarah Johnson had represented clients in courtroom 3A for 6 years, bringing to her work commitment to vigorous advocacy and belief in the importance of equal justice regardless of economic status. Her caseload often exceeded recommended limits, requiring efficient preparation and strategic decision-making. The prosecutor's office occupied the courthouse's 4th floor, with attorneys responsible for representing the state's interests in criminal cases and working with law enforcement agencies to ensure that investigations supported successful prosecutions. The office coordinated closely with police departments and other investigative agencies. District Attorney Michael Thompson had supervised the prosecutor's office for 12 years, implementing policies that emphasize both public safety and fair treatment of defendants. His approach required balancing competing demands for aggressive prosecution and constitutional protections. The courthouse's emergency procedures addressed various scenarios ranging from medical emergencies to security threats, with protocols that ensured rapid response while maintaining court operations when possible. These procedures were practiced regularly and updated based on changing threat assessments and technological capabilities. The building's evacuation plans designated specific routes and assembly areas that allowed rapid clearing of the courthouse while ensuring accountability for all occupants. The plans considered the special requirements for moving individuals in custody and protecting sensitive materials and equipment. As dawn approached and the first light appeared in the courthouse windows, the building prepared for another day of judicial proceedings that would continue the centuries-old process of seeking justice through careful application of legal principles to human conflicts. The empty courtrooms would soon fill with the voices of attorneys, witnesses, and citizens participating in democracy's most fundamental process. The connection between the courthouse and the police station 6 blocks away would be strengthened by another day of coordinated effort to investigate crimes, gather evidence, and present cases that served both individual justice and community safety. The buildings themselves stood as monuments to this ongoing commitment to the rule of law. Asterisk. The house at 847 Maple Street had been painted white with blue trim for as long as anyone in the neighborhood could remember, its front porch supporting a swing that moved gently in the evening breeze even when no one sat upon it. Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell had lived in this house for 43 years, watching children grow up, families move away, and new residents discover the quiet rhythms that defined life on Maple Street. Her kitchen window faced east toward the industrial district, providing a view that included the warehouse where she had reported unusual sounds in 1987. The warehouse was no longer visible from her window, hidden now behind a medical center that had been built in 1995. But Mrs. Hartwell still remembered the morning when she had made the phone call that brought police officers to investigate her concerns about trespassing. The police report from that morning had recorded her age as 63, making her 100 years old now, though she had passed away peacefully in 2019 at the age of 95. Her house was now occupied by the Morrison family, who had purchased it from Mrs. Hartwell's estate and discovered, in the basement, boxes of newspapers and documents that included a copy of the police report about the warehouse incident. David Morrison worked as an accountant for the city's school district, his daily commute, taking him past the police station where the original report about his property's previous owner remained filed in the archives. He was unaware of this connection, just as he was unaware that Mrs. Hartwell had been mentioned in dozens of other police reports over the years as a reliable witness who kept careful watch over her neighborhood. The Morrison children, Sarah and Michael, attended Roosevelt Elementary School 6 blocks from their home, walking along sidewalks that had been traveled by generations of neighborhood children. Their route took them past houses where other families had experienced their own brief intersections with police investigations, creating an invisible network of connections that linked their daily lives to the broader story of community, safety, and law enforcement. Mrs. Chun from the police archives had driven past the Morrison house countless times during her 23 years of commuting to work, never knowing that the woman who had once lived there had been one of the first witnesses she had encountered when she began working in the records department. The connection remained invisible, buried in files that contained thousands of similar threads linking strangers across decades of shared community experience. The Hendersons, who lived at 892 Maple Street, had moved to the neighborhood in 2001, purchasing their house from an elderly man whose nephew had been arrested for the burglary of Henderson's 5 and dime store in 1953. The nephew, Thomas Kowalski, had long since passed away, but his successful construction company had built the Hendersons' garage in 1987, the same year that Mrs. Hartwell had reported the warehouse incident 3 blocks away. These connections existed throughout the neighborhood, creating patterns that were visible only to someone who might spend years studying police reports and property records. Families moved in and out of houses that held their own histories of interaction with law enforcement, each residence containing stories that had been carefully documented and filed. Away in the police archives, thought the apartment building at the corner of Maple and 3rd Street housed 12 families, including Maria Santos, who worked as a dispatcher for the fire department. Her evening shift often overlapped with the police dispatchers at the station 4 blocks away, and their radio communications occasionally intersected during calls that required coordinated emergency response. Maria Santos had handled the dispatch for a house fire at 756 Maple Street in 2018, coordinating fire trucks and ambulances while maintaining contact with police units that provided traffic control and crowd management. The fire had been contained to the kitchen with no injuries, but the incident had required reports from multiple agencies that were filed in separate archives throughout the city. The family displaced by the kitchen fire had stayed temporarily with relatives on Industrial Boulevard in a house that overlooked the former warehouse where Mrs. Hartwell's 1987 report had originated. They had been unaware of this historical connection, focusing instead on the immediate challenges of coordinating insurance claims and repair contractors. The insurance investigator, who examined the kitchen fire, had used the police report to verify details about the incident's timeline and the response of emergency services. His report, filed with the insurance company, became part of another archive that paralleled the police files in its careful documentation of events affecting community members. The contractor hired to repair the kitchen fire damage was the grandson of Thomas Kowalski, the young man who had burglarized Henderson's 5 and dime store in 1953. The grandson, Thomas Kowalski Jr., operated a successful restoration company that specialized in fire and water damage, continuing the family tradition of construction work that had begun when his grandfather rebuilt his life after his youthful mistake. Thomas Kowalski Jr. was unaware that his grandfather's case file remained in the police archives, just as he was unaware that his current restoration work connected him to the ongoing story of neighborhood, resilience, and recovery that characterized life on Maple Street. His careful work repairing the kitchen returned the house to its previous condition, erasing the visible traces of the fire while adding another chapter to the property's accumulated history. The elderly woman who lived next door to the fire-damaged house had called 911 to report the smoke she had observed, beginning the chain of emergency response that brought fire trucks, police cars, and ambulances to the quiet residential street. Her call was recorded and transcribed according to the same protocols that had documented Mrs. Hartwell's warehouse report 31 years earlier. The 911 dispatcher, who had taken the fire report, worked in a communications center that was located in the same building as the police archives, though she had never visited the basement levels where Mrs. Chun maintained the filed reports. The dispatcher's logbook entry about the fire call would eventually be transferred to archive storage, adding to the accumulated record of community events and emergency responses. The police officer who had provided traffic control during the fire response was Officer Jennifer Martinez, the daughter of the bailiff who worked in courtroom 3A at the county courthouse. Her report about the fire call was filed using the same systematic procedures that had guided police documentation for decades, creating continuity between her father's work in the courthouse and her own service and patrol operations. Officer Martinez had attended Roosevelt Elementary School with children who had grown up to become teachers, business owners, and public employees throughout the city. Her police reports occasionally involved people she had known since childhood, creating personal connections that complicated the professional distance required for effective law enforcement. The principal of Roosevelt Elementary School, Dr. Patricia Williams, had been a social worker when she first encountered Thomas Kowalski during his family's crisis. Following his arrest for burglary in 1953, she had helped connect the family with resources that supported Thomas's rehabilitation and eventual success as a contractor, though she later lost track of his progress when she changed careers to education. Dr. Williams was now nearing retirement after 47 years in education and social services, her career spanning the period during which many of the police reports in the archives had been written. She had worked with hundreds of families affected by crime, unemployment, and other social challenges that brought them into contact with various government agencies. Her files from social work practice had been transferred to state archives when she changed careers, creating another repository of documentation that paralleled the police records in its careful preservation of information about community members and their circumstances. These files contained information about families and individuals who had also appeared in police reports, though the connections between different agency records were rarely apparent to the people involved. The neighborhoods surrounding the police station contained dozens of families whose lives had intersected with law enforcement in various ways over the decades. Some intersections involved serious crimes that resulted in arrests and prosecutions, while others involved routine reports about property damage, noise complaints, or requests for assistance with domestic situations. The Williams family, who had lived at 623 Oak Street for 15 years, had called police 3 times during their residence, once to report a stolen bicycle, once to request a welfare check on an elderly neighbor, and once to report vandalism of their mailbox. Each call had resulted in a police report that was filed and indexed according to the same procedures used for major criminal investigations. The stolen bicycle report had been written by Officer Bradley, the same officer who had investigated the warehouse incident in 1987. His investigation of the bicycle theft had included interviews with neighbors, examination of the area where the bicycle had been taken, and coordination with pawn shops and used bicycle dealers who might have encountered the stolen property. The bicycle was never recovered. But the investigation had demonstrated the same thorough approach that characterized Officer Bradley's work on all cases, regardless of their apparent significance. His report included detailed descriptions of the bicycle, information about when and where it had been stolen, and recommendations for preventing similar thefts in the future. The welfare check requested by the Williams family had involved an elderly neighbor who had not been seen for several days and was not answering her door or telephone. The responding officer had coordinated with the neighbor's adult children and had ultimately determined that she was visiting relatives in another state, having forgotten to inform her neighbors about her travel plans. The welfare check report documented the careful steps taken to verify the neighbor's well-being while respecting her privacy and independence. The investigation had required patience and persistence to contact relatives and confirm the neighbor's whereabouts. But it had provided peace of mind for concerned neighbors while ensuring that no emergency assistance was needed. The mailbox vandalism report had been filed when someone had damaged several mailboxes along Oak Street with a baseball bat, creating property damage that required coordination between residents, postal authorities, and police investigators. The vandalism had occurred during a series of similar incidents that suggested the work of teenagers or young adults acting out of boredom or frustration. The vandalism investigation had involved multiple reports from affected residents, analysis of timing patterns that might indicate when the vandalism had occurred, and consultation with school officials and youth organizations that might help identify potential suspects. The case had eventually been resolved when several teenagers accepted responsibility and arranged to pay for repairs. The resolution of the mailbox vandalism case had required coordination between police, juvenile court officials, parents, and the affected residents to develop consequences that emphasized accountability and restitution rather than punishment. The approach reflected understanding that juvenile offenses often required different responses than adult criminal behavior. The teenagers involved in the mailbox vandalism had gone on to complete high school and pursue various careers, their youthful mistake becoming a learning experience that helped them develop better judgment and respect for community property. The police reports about their vandalism remained in the archives, but the young people had moved beyond their mistake to become productive community members. One of the teenagers involved in the mailbox incidents, Kevin Rodriguez, had later joined the military and served 2 tours of duty overseas before returning to work as a counselor for at-risk youth. His experience with the juvenile justice system had influenced his career choice and helped him understand the importance of positive intervention in young people's lives. Kevin Rodriguez's current work brought him into regular contact with police officers who were assigned to school liaison programs designed to build positive relationships between law enforcement and students. His collaboration with these officers created connections that linked his past experience as a juvenile offender to his current role as a mentor and counselor. Asterisk. The school liaison officers who worked with Kevin Rodriguez included Officer Patricia Coleman, who had been a corrections deputy at the county jail before transferring to community policing assignments. Her work with students emphasized crime prevention and positive decision-making, helping young people avoid the mistakes that had brought Kevin and his friends into contact with the juvenile justice system. Officer Coleman's reports about her school liaison work documented successful interventions and relationship-building activities that prevented problems, rather than simply responding to incidents after they occurred. Her approach reflected evolving understanding about the importance of community engagement and prevention in effective law enforcement. The students who participated in Officer Coleman's programs included children whose families had appeared in various police reports over the years. Though these connections were rarely apparent to the participants, the programs created opportunities for positive interaction between police and community members that helped build trust and understanding across generational and cultural boundaries. The community center where Officer Coleman conducted some of her programs was located in a building that had previously housed the Henderson's Five and Dime store that Thomas Kowalski had burglarized in 1953. The building had been renovated and repurposed several times over the decades. Its current use as a community gathering place, reflecting the neighborhood's evolution and growth. The community center's programs served families throughout the area, including descendants of people who had appeared in police reports dating back to the 1920s. The center provided services ranging from after-school tutoring to senior citizen activities, creating opportunities for community building that helped prevent the social isolation that sometimes contributed to criminal behavior. The senior citizen programs at the community center included several elderly residents who had been witnesses or victims in cases documented in the police archives. Their participation in community activities provided opportunities for social interaction and mutual support that enhanced their quality of life while contributing to neighborhood stability. Mrs. Dorothy Foster, who attended the senior center's weekly coffee gatherings, had been interviewed by police in 1978 about a purse snatching that had occurred outside the grocery store on Main Street. Her witness statement had helped identify the suspect, who was arrested and prosecuted for the crime. Though Mrs. Foster had no memory of the incident, 46 years later, the purse snatching case had been investigated by Detective Harrison, who later analyzed the warehouse vandalism case as part of his comprehensive review of property crimes in the industrial district. His work had helped establish patterns and trends that informed crime prevention strategies and resource allocation decisions throughout the police department. Detective Harrison's retirement in 2003 had been marked by a ceremony in the community center, where dozens of colleagues and community members gathered to honor his 31 years of service. The event had included representatives from families and organizations that had benefited from his investigative work. Though many of the connections between his cases and their lives remained unknown to the participants, the community relationships that Detective Harrison had built during his career continued to influence police work long after his retirement. As officers who had learned from his example applied his approaches to community engagement and problem solving, his legacy lived on in the methods and attitudes that characterized the department's continuing evolution. The families who lived in the neighborhoods surrounding the police station represented multiple generations of interaction with law enforcement, creating layers of connection and experience that influenced community attitudes toward police and public safety. These relationships evolved over time, shaped by individual experiences and broader social changes. The Patel family, who operated a convenience store on Industrial Boulevard, had moved to the neighborhood in 1992, purchasing a business that had been robbed twice during the previous decade. Their investment in security improvements and community engagement had helped transform the store into a safe and welcoming gathering place that contributed to neighborhood stability. The Patel security improvements had been developed in consultation with police crime prevention specialists who provided advice about lighting, camera placement, and cash handling procedures that reduced the store's attractiveness as a robbery target. The collaboration between business owners and police reflected community policing approaches that emphasized partnership and prevention. The convenience store had become an informal community center where neighbors gathered to purchase necessities, share news, and maintain the social connections that contributed to collective security. The Patels' commitment to their adopted Community had created relationships that extended far beyond simple commercial transactions. The children who grew up shopping at the Patel convenience store included future police officers, teachers, and community leaders who would carry forward the lessons about cooperation and mutual respect that they observed in the store's daily operations. These lessons influenced their approaches to community engagement and public service throughout their careers. The interconnections between families, businesses, schools, and law enforcement agencies created a complex web of relationships that supported community stability while providing multiple opportunities for positive intervention when problems arose. These relationships were rarely visible in individual police reports, but formed the foundation for effective community policing. The police officers who patrolled the neighborhoods surrounding the station understood that their work involved much more than responding to calls for service. They served as community members who participated in the ongoing process of building and maintaining relationships that supported public safety and quality of life for all residents. Officer Maria Santos, who had grown up in the neighborhood before joining the police department, brought personal knowledge of community dynamics that informed her approach to patrol work and problem solving. Her connections to local families and businesses provided insights that helped her anticipate problems and develop effective responses. Officer Santos's patrol reports reflected her understanding of the community context that influenced individual incidents and her ability to address underlying conditions that contributed to recurring problems. Her work demonstrated the value of officers who understood the neighborhoods they served and could build on existing relationships to promote positive change. The evening shift that Officer Santos worked brought her into contact with community members during times when families gathered for dinner. Children played in yards and parks, and neighbors engaged in the informal socializing that maintained community bonds. Her presence during these quiet times reinforced the sense of security that allowed normal community life to flourish. The reports that Officer Santos wrote about her patrol activities documented not only specific incidents but also her observations about community conditions and her efforts to maintain positive relationships with residents. These reports contributed to the department's understanding of neighborhood dynamics and helped guide resource allocation and program development. As midnight approached and the neighborhood settled into the quiet rhythms of night, the connections between families, police, and community institutions continued to provide the invisible infrastructure that supported safety and stability. The police reports filed away in the archives represented only the visible portion of these relationships, while the deeper bonds of community remained largely unrecorded but constantly present. The houses along Maple Street, Oak Street, and Industrial Boulevard held families whose lives had been touched by crime in various ways, but who had found in their community the support and resilience needed to overcome challenges and build better futures. Their stories lived on in the police files, but more importantly, they lived on in the continuing strength of the neighborhood itself. At 11 p.m., Sergeant Linda Hayes signed in for her overnight shift, her coffee thermos and worn leather briefcase marking the beginning of another 8-hour journey through the quiet hours when the city revealed its most contemplative face. She had worked the night shift for 14 years, finding in its solitude and steady rhythms a peace that eluded her during the busy chaos of day patrol operations. The shift change briefing took place in Conference Room B, where fluorescent lights hummed softly above a table, scarred by decades of coffee cups and the careful notations of officers planning their approaches to community safety. Tonight's briefing included updates on 3 ongoing investigations, reminders about court appearances scheduled for the following week, and notifications about construction zones that would affect patrol routes. Officer Rebecca Park had drawn desk duty for the overnight shift, her assignment involving the careful processing of reports that had accumulated during the previous day's activities. She settled into the metal desk chair that had supported generations of night shift officers, adjusting the desk lamp to provide adequate illumination for the detailed paperwork that would occupy the next 8 hours, the reports waiting for. Officer Park's attention included 17 incident summaries, each requiring careful review for completeness, accuracy, and proper classification according to state reporting requirements. Her work would ensure that every case received appropriate follow-up attention while maintaining the statistical accuracy that guided departmental planning and resource allocation. The first report in Officer Park's stack documented a minor traffic accident at the intersection of Maple and 4th Street, with no injuries but sufficient property damage to require official documentation. The investigating officer's narrative described weather conditions, traffic patterns, and witness statements that would support insurance claims and help identify any contributing factors that might inform future traffic safety measures. Officer Park's review of the traffic accident report involved checking every field for completeness, verifying that all required signatures had been obtained, and ensuring that the case had been properly classified in the department's records management system. Her careful attention to these details prevented delays and complications that might arise if reports were submitted with missing or incorrect information. The second report described a residential burglary on Oak Street, where thieves had entered through an unlocked back door while the family was attending a school basketball game. The stolen items included electronics, jewelry, and cash, with a total estimated value of $3,800 that represented months of careful saving by a family struggling to make ends meet. The burglary investigation had involved extensive documentation of the crime scene, interviews with neighbors who might have observed unusual activity, and coordination with pawn shops and second-hand dealers who might encounter the stolen merchandise. Officer Park's review ensured that all investigative steps had been properly documented and that appropriate follow-up actions had been scheduled. The detective assigned to the burglary case had left detailed notes about potential leads that required additional investigation, including information about similar break-ins in neighboring jurisdictions that might indicate the work of organized thieves operating across multiple police departments. Officer Park's processing of these notes ensured that the detective would receive proper administrative support for pursuing these connections. The third report involved a domestic disturbance call where officers had mediated a heated argument between spouses who were struggling with financial pressures related to medical bills and unemployment. The situation had been resolved without arrests, but the responding officers had provided information about counseling services and financial assistance programs that might help address underlying stresses. Officer Park's review of the domestic disturbance report included verification that the officers had followed proper protocols for assessing safety risks and providing appropriate referrals to social services. The report documented not only the immediate resolution of the conflict, but also the preventive measures taken to address conditions that might lead to future problems. The quiet efficiency of the overnight shift created an atmosphere where the true nature of police work became apparent through the steady accumulation of carefully processed paperwork. Each report represented someone's crisis, someone's loss, someone's moment of conflict or confusion that had required intervention by trained professionals committed to maintaining community safety and order. The radio traffic during overnight hours consisted primarily of routine check-ins from patrol units, occasional requests for information or assistance, and the measured updates that marked the progress of time through the quiet city. Dispatcher Jennifer Walsh monitored these communications from her station in the communications center, her calm voice providing the steady guidance that connected scattered patrol units with centralized resources and information. Dispatcher Walsh's logbook recorded every radio transmission, according to protocols that ensured accurate documentation of police activities for administrative, legal, and statistical purposes. Her entries included times, unit numbers, locations, and brief descriptions of communications that created a comprehensive record of overnight operations. The communications equipment that Dispatcher Walsh operated represented decades of technological evolution, from the simple radio systems of earlier eras to sophisticated digital networks that provided encryption, automatic recording, and integration with computer databases that enhanced officer safety and operational efficiency. The overnight dispatcher's role required not only technical expertise in operating complex communication systems, but also psychological skills in managing stress and maintaining calm during emergency situations. Dispatcher Walsh's training had prepared her to handle everything from routine status checks to life-threatening emergencies that demanded instant coordination of multiple resources. The calls that came into the communications center during overnight hours often involved people experiencing their worst moments, victims of crimes, witnesses to accidents, family members discovering loved ones in medical emergencies. Dispatcher Walsh's professional demeanor provided reassurance and guidance during these crisis situations, while ensuring that appropriate resources were deployed quickly and efficiently. The emergency medical calls that required police response during overnight hours included situations where officers provided first aid while waiting for paramedics, managed traffic around accident scenes, or assisted with death investigations that required coordination between multiple agencies. These calls demonstrated the diverse skills that police officers needed to serve their communities effectively. Officer Michael Torres had drawn patrol duty for the overnight shift. His assigned area, including the industrial district where the warehouse incident had occurred 37 years earlier. His patrol route took him past the building every 2 hours, his observations contributing to the ongoing surveillance that helped maintain security in an area that combined active businesses with vacant properties. The industrial district during overnight hours revealed a different character than its daytime personality, with loading docks empty of trucks, parking lots free of cars, and security lights casting pools of illumination across areas that bustled with activity during business hours. Officer Torres's patrol provided a visible police presence that discouraged criminal activity while allowing him to observe changes in conditions that might indicate emerging problems. Officer Torres's patrol reports documented his observations about property conditions, suspicious vehicles, and other factors that contributed to area security. His notes about burnt-out streetlights, damaged fencing, and abandoned vehicles helped coordinate with city services and property owners to address conditions that might attract criminal activity. The warehouse building that had been the subject of Mrs. Hartwell's 1987 report now housed Martinez Furniture Distribution, a family-owned business that employed 47 people in warehouse and delivery operations. The building's transformation from abandoned property to productive business represented the kind of positive change that community policing efforts sought to encourage. During his patrol of the industrial district, Officer Torres occasionally stopped to check the warehouse building, his inspection ensuring that the security measures installed by Martinez Furniture Distribution were functioning properly. His relationship with the business owners reflected the partnership approach that characterized effective community policing. The Martinez family had invested significant resources in security improvements that protected both their business and the surrounding neighborhood, including lighting systems, alarm systems, and surveillance cameras that help deter criminal activity. Their commitment to property maintenance and security created positive conditions that benefited the entire industrial district. Officer Torres's reports about the industrial district included information about the legitimate business activities that created natural surveillance and activity, patterns that discouraged criminal behavior. His observations helped the department understand how economic development and business investment contributed to community safety and crime prevention. The night shift patrol activities extended beyond simple surveillance to include checks on businesses, schools, and other facilities that required security attention during hours when they were closed to the public. These checks provided peace of mind for property owners while maintaining police familiarity with community infrastructure and potential security vulnerabilities. Roosevelt Elementary School received a security check every night during Officer Torres's patrol. His inspection including examination of doors, windows, and grounds for signs of vandalism or unauthorized access. The school had experienced minimal security problems over the years, but regular police attention helped maintain the safe environment that students and families deserved. The school's principal, Dr. Patricia Williams, had worked with Officer Torres to develop security procedures that balanced access needs with protection requirements. Their collaboration had resulted in measures that protected school property while preserving the open, welcoming atmosphere that characterized effective educational environments. Asterisk. The community center that occupied the former Henderson's Five and Dime building also received regular security checks during overnight patrols, with officers ensuring that the facility remained secure for the various programs and activities that served neighborhood residents. The center's transformation from retail space to community gathering place reflected the adaptive reuse that helped maintain neighborhood vitality. Officer Torres's security checks at the community center included verification that alarm systems were functioning properly and that no unauthorized persons were attempting to access the building during closed hours. His reports documented the building's condition and any maintenance issues that required attention from city facilities management. The quiet streets that Officer Torres patrolled during overnight hours contained houses where families slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that police officers were maintaining vigilant watch over their community. This security allowed parents to rest knowing that their children were protected, workers to sleep before early shifts, and elderly residents to feel safe in their homes. The street lighting throughout Officer Torres's patrol area had been upgraded twice during his 7 years of night shift work, each improvement making the area safer for pedestrians while providing better visibility for police surveillance. The lighting improvements had been coordinated between the police department and city utilities to maximize crime prevention benefits. Officer Torres's observations about lighting effectiveness were included in his patrol reports, providing feedback that helped guide future improvement projects. His recommendations had contributed to lighting upgrades that reduced shadows where criminal activity might occur while maintaining the residential character that neighbors valued. The parks and recreational areas within Officer Torres's patrol zone required special attention during overnight hours when they were closed to public use but might attract unauthorized visitors. His checks of these areas helped prevent vandalism, drug activity, and other problems that could affect the facility's usefulness for legitimate recreational activities. Riverside Park, located 6 blocks from the police station, contained playground equipment, sports fields, and walking trails that served hundreds of families throughout the year. Officer Torres's overnight security checks ensured that these facilities remained in good condition and free from activities that might make them unsafe for intended users. The park's Maintenance had been improved significantly during Officer Torres's tenure, with regular coordination between police observations and Parks Department repairs, addressing problems before they became serious. This collaborative approach had kept the park in excellent condition while preventing the deterioration that sometimes affected public facilities. Officer Torres's reports about park conditions included information about equipment maintenance needs, landscaping issues, and suggestions for improvements that might enhance both recreational value and security. His recommendations had contributed to playground upgrades, improved lighting, and pathway repairs that benefited all park users. The overnight shift allowed Officer Torres to observe community conditions during the quiet hours when problems were most apparent and solutions most feasible. His detailed observations contributed to the department's understanding of neighborhood dynamics and helped guide both immediate responses and long-term planning efforts. Back at the station, Officer Park continued her methodical review of incident reports, each document receiving the careful attention that ensured accuracy and completeness in the permanent record. Her work provided the administrative foundation that supported all other police activities, from investigations to court proceedings to statistical analysis. The fourth report in Officer Park's stack documented a shoplifting incident at Peterson's hardware store, where a teenager had attempted to steal electrical supplies worth approximately $60. The store's security cameras had captured clear images of the incident, and the teenager's parents had been contacted to arrange restitution and counseling. Rather than formal prosecution, Officer Park's review of the shoplifting report included verification that the juvenile procedures had been followed correctly and that appropriate notifications had been made to schools and social services agencies that might provide additional support for the teenager and family. Her processing ensured that the case would receive proper follow-up attention. The fifth report described a noise complaint from residents of an apartment building where a tenant's television had been playing at excessive volume during late evening hours. The responding officer had mediated a resolution that satisfied both the complaining neighbors and the television owner, demonstrating the problem-solving skills that characterized effective community policing. Officer Park's review of the noise complaint report ensured that the resolution had been properly documented and that no further action was required. Her attention to these details prevented minor issues from escalating into major problems while maintaining good relationships between police and community members. Sixth report involved a minor vehicle break-in where thieves had stolen loose change and a cell phone charger from an unlocked car parked on Residential Street. The investigating officer had used the incident as an opportunity to remind neighbors about securing their vehicles and removing valuable items that might attract thieves. Officer Park's processing of the vehicle break-in report included coordination with crime prevention specialists who would provide additional security education for the affected neighborhood. Her administrative work helped connect individual incidents to broader prevention efforts that addressed underlying conditions contributing to property crimes. The steady rhythm of report processing created a meditative quality in the overnight shift work, with each document receiving the same careful attention regardless of its complexity or apparent significance. Officer Park understood that her administrative diligence supported the entire law enforcement process by ensuring that every case received proper documentation and follow-up. The pavilion wall clock in the report processing area marked the passage of time with a soft electric hum that provided background rhythm for the night shift activities. The clock had been installed in 1987, the same year as the warehouse investigation, and its steady presence had marked countless overnight shifts dedicated to the careful work of maintaining public safety. Dispatcher Walsh's radio traffic had slowed to routine status checks as the city settled into the deepest quiet of the overnight hours. Her communications log showed a typical night of minimal emergency activity, allowing patrol officers to focus on preventive activities and community engagement rather than crisis response. The coffee pot in the break room had been programmed to brew fresh coffee at 2 a.m., providing the caffeine support that helped night shift personnel maintain alertness during the hours when biological rhythms naturally slowed. The coffee ritual had become a small but important element of overnight shift culture, creating opportunities for brief social interaction. During long hours of solitary work, Officer Torres had completed his second patrol circuit of the industrial district, his observations noting that all businesses remained secure and that no unusual activities had been observed. His reports contributed to the statistical analysis that showed crime rates in the area had decreased significantly since the Martinez Furniture Distribution Company had occupied the former warehouse building. The transformation of the warehouse from abandoned property to productive business had created legitimate activity and natural surveillance that discouraged criminal behavior while providing employment and economic benefits for the community. Officer Torres's documentation of these positive changes helped to demonstrate the effectiveness of community development approaches to crime prevention. As 3 a.m. approached, the night shift settled into its deepest rhythm, with reports being processed, patrols being conducted, and communications being monitored with the steady professionalism that characterized police work during the quiet hours. The accumulation of careful documentation created permanent records that would support justice, guide policy, and preserve community memory for future generations. The fluorescent lights in the station hummed their constant electric song, providing steady illumination for the important work that continued through the night. Each report processed, each patrol completed, each radio call answered contributed to the ongoing effort to maintain the safety and security that allowed community life to flourish. In the records room below, Mrs. Chun's filing systems held thousands of similar reports from previous night shifts, each document representing the careful work of officers who had chosen to serve their community during the hours when most citizens slept peacefully in their homes. The archives preserved not only the facts of individual cases, but also the dedication and professionalism that characterized police service across multiple generations. The night shift work continued, its quiet rhythm, processing the present into permanent record while building on the foundation of service that connected current officers to their predecessors and successors in the ongoing mission of law enforcement. Each document, each patrol, each careful observation added another thread to the fabric of community safety that protected and served all residents. In the evidence room's climate-controlled section, Photograph Album 1967C contained images that had once appeared on the front pages of newspapers, their stark black and white compositions capturing moments of crisis that had mobilized the entire community. Now, 57 years later, the photographs rested in acid-free sleeves, their silver halide crystals slowly surrendering to time's patient chemistry, transforming urgent documentation into gentle historical artifacts. The first photograph in the album showed the exterior of Riverside Chemical Plant during the early morning hours of June 15th, 1967, when an equipment malfunction had released a cloud of chlorine gas that prompted the evacuation of 6 city blocks. The image captured fire trucks positioned at safe distances, their crews wearing protective equipment that looked primitive compared to contemporary hazardous materials gear. The photographer who had taken the chemical plant images was Officer James Sullivan, who had received training in evidence photography during his military service and had been assigned to document emergency scenes that required permanent records for insurance, regulatory, and legal purposes. His careful composition and technical precision had created Images that remained clear and informative despite the passage of decades. Officer Sullivan's photographic technique emphasized comprehensive documentation over artistic impact, with systematic coverage that included wide shots establishing overall scene conditions, medium shots showing specific areas of concern, and close-up images capturing details that might prove significant during subsequent investigation or analysis. His methodical approach had created complete visual records that supported written reports and witness statements. The chemical plant emergency had required coordination between police, fire department, environmental health officials, and industrial safety specialists who were still developing protocols for handling hazardous materials incidents. The photographs documented not only the immediate response but also the learning process that helped establish procedures for similar future emergencies. The evacuation zone established around the chemical plant had included the Roosevelt Elementary School, where Principal Dr. Patricia Williams had coordinated with police and fire officials to ensure safe relocation of students and staff to the community center 3 blocks away. The photograph showed school buses arriving to transport children to the temporary shelter, their orderly evacuation demonstrating the emergency preparedness that protected vulnerable populations. Dr. Williams had been in her 3rd year as principal during the chemical plant emergency. Her experience as a social worker helping her manage the complex logistics of student safety while maintaining calm among children who were confused and frightened by the sudden disruption of their normal school routine. Her leadership during the emergency had established her reputation as someone who could handle crisis situations with professional competence and personal compassion. The photographs documenting the school evacuation showed Dr. Williams walking alongside the school buses, her presence providing reassurance to students while ensuring that proper safety protocols were followed. The images captured a moment when individual leadership made the difference between orderly evacuation and potential panic among vulnerable children. The community center that served as emergency shelter during the chemical plant incident was the same building that had housed Henderson's Five and Dime store, where Thomas Kowalski had committed his teenage burglary in 1953. The photographs showed Red Cross volunteers setting up cots and refreshment stations in the former retail space, transforming a community gathering place into a temporary refuge for displaced families. Transformation of the Five and Dime building into an emergency shelter demonstrated the adaptive capacity that characterized effective community infrastructure, with familiar spaces being repurposed to meet urgent needs. The photographs preserved this moment of civic cooperation when neighbors helped neighbors during a crisis that had threatened community safety. The elderly residents who had been evacuated from the nursing home near the chemical plant were visible in several photographs, their wheelchairs and walkers creating poignant images of vulnerability and resilience. The nursing home staff had coordinated with emergency responders to ensure safe transport and continued medical care for residents who required specialized attention during the evacuation period. Among the evacuated nursing home residents was Mrs. Eleanor Morrison, whose granddaughter would later become Judge Patricia Morrison in courtroom 3A at the county courthouse. The photograph showing Mrs. Morrison being assisted into an ambulance captured a moment that connected personal family history to the broader community story of emergency response and mutual aid. The chemical plant photographs included images of the industrial equipment that had malfunctioned, creating the gas leak that prompted the emergency response. The technical documentation showed valve configurations, pipe connections, and safety systems that would be analyzed by industrial engineers, seeking to prevent similar incidents in the future. Industrial accident investigation had required expertise that extended beyond local law. Enforcement capabilities, bringing in specialists from state environmental agencies and federal occupational safety organizations. The photographs provided visual evidence that supported technical analysis and regulatory enforcement actions designed to improve industrial safety. Practices that the resolution of the chemical plant emergency had resulted in significant improvements to industrial safety protocols throughout the city, with new regulations requiring better emergency notification systems, upgraded safety equipment, and enhanced coordination between industrial facilities and emergency responders. The photographs documented conditions that led to these important safety improvements. Album 1972 contained photographs from a different type of emergency, documenting the response to a major flood that had affected the Riverside neighborhood when spring rains overwhelmed the storm drainage system and caused Buffalo Creek to rise above its banks. The images showed water flowing through residential streets, transforming familiar neighborhoods into temporary lakes that reflected the urgent lights of emergency vehicles. The flood photographs had been taken by Officer Maria Santos, the mother of the current patrol officer, who worked the same neighborhoods that had been affected by the 1972 emergency. Officer Santos had used a waterproof camera case to document flood conditions while wading through knee-deep water to assist with evacuations and rescue operations. Systematic photography during the flood emergency had captured not only the immediate damage, but also the community response that mobilized volunteers, emergency responders, and relief organizations to assist affected families. The images showed neighbors helping neighbors, with boats and high clearance, vehicles being used to evacuate elderly residents and families. With young children, the Red Cross shelter, established during the flood emergency, had been located in the gymnasium at Roosevelt Elementary School, the same facility that had served as an evacuation point during the chemical plant emergency 5 years earlier. The photograph showed the school's multi-purpose spaces being transformed into temporary housing for displaced families, demonstrating the versatile community infrastructure that supported emergency response. The flood had particularly affected low-income families who lived in rental housing near the creek, many of whom had lost personal belongings and household necessities that were difficult to replace on limited budgets. The photographs documented not only physical damage, but also the human impact of natural disasters on vulnerable populations who had limited resources for recovery. The community response to the flood emergency had included donations of clothing, furniture, and household items from throughout the metropolitan area, with the community center serving as a distribution point for relief supplies. The photograph showed volunteers sorting donations and helping affected families find items they needed to rebuild their households. Among the flood photographs was an image of young Kevin Rodriguez, the teenager who would later be involved in the mailbox vandalism incident before going on to military service and a career in youth counseling. The photograph showed him helping elderly neighbors carry belongings to safety, demonstrating the community spirit that characterized his family's approach to civic responsibility. The flood recovery efforts had required coordination between multiple government agencies, relief organizations, and community groups, creating partnerships that continued to benefit the neighborhood long after the immediate emergency had passed. The photographs documented the foundation building that helped create stronger community resilience for future challenges. Album 1978B contained photographs from a series of break-ins that had affected small businesses throughout the downtown commercial district, creating concerns about economic security that threatened the viability of local enterprises. The images showed damaged storefronts, scattered merchandise, and the dejected expressions of business owners who were struggling to recover from repeated thefts. The commercial break-ins had been investigated by Detective Harrison during his early career, when he was developing the analytical approaches that would later make him a specialist in identifying crime patterns and trends. The photographs he had taken showed not only immediate damage, but also security vulnerabilities that contributed to the business's attractiveness as targets. Detective Harrison's photographic documentation of the commercial break-ins had included systematic coverage of entry points, security systems, and surrounding areas that might provide opportunities for surveillance or escape routes. His comprehensive approach had helped identify patterns that led to the arrest of suspects who were responsible for multiple incidents. The business owners affected by the break-ins had included the Peterson family, whose hardware store would later be the site of the teenage shoplifting incident that Officer Park had processed during her overnight shift. The photograph showed Mr. Peterson surveying damage to his store, his expression reflecting the frustration and concern that motivated his later investment in improved security systems. The break-in investigation had led to the arrest of 3 suspects who were found to be responsible for 15 separate incidents affecting businesses throughout the downtown area. The photographs of recovered merchandise showed the scope of the theft ring and provided evidence that supported successful prosecution of the suspects. The resolution of the commercial break-in cases had prompted formation of a merchant association that worked with police to improve security, coordination, and information sharing among business owners. The photographs documented conditions that led to this important partnership between private enterprise and law enforcement. Album 1983D contained photographs from a traffic accident at the intersection of Maple and Industrial Boulevard that had resulted in serious injuries and prompted installation of the traffic signal that still controlled the intersection 41 years later. The images showed the mangled vehicles and emergency response that had mobilized multiple ambulances and fire trucks to assist the victims. The traffic accident photographs had been taken by Officer Patricia Coleman, who was then a rookie patrol officer learning the importance of thorough documentation in cases that might result in civil litigation or traffic engineering studies. Her careful attention to detail had created images that remained useful for legal and analytical purposes decades later. The accident investigation had revealed that sightline problems caused by overgrown vegetation had contributed to the collision, leading to landscape modifications and the installation of improved warning signs that enhanced safety for all intersection users. The photographs provided evidence that supported these important infrastructure improvements. The victims of the traffic accident had included Mrs. Dorothy Foster, the elderly woman who later attended senior citizen programs at the community center and had previously been a witness in the 1978 purse snatching case. The photograph showed her being treated by paramedics, documenting medical attention that helped save her life and enable her recovery. The traffic safety improvements implemented after the 1983 accident had prevented numerous similar collisions over the intervening decades, demonstrating how thorough investigation and documentation could lead to changes that protected future community members. The photographs preserved the evidence that justified these life-saving modifications. Album 1989F contained photographs from a fire at the Martinez Furniture Distribution Building, the same warehouse that had been the subject of Mrs. Hartwell's 1987 trespassing report. The images showed smoke billowing from the structure's loading dock area, where an electrical malfunction had caused a blaze that threatened to spread to adjacent buildings. The warehouse fire photographs had been taken by Officer Jennifer Martinez, who would later work the night shift patrol that included regular security checks of the rebuilt facility. Her documentation of the fire response had captured both the immediate emergency and the coordinated effort that prevented spread of the blaze to neighboring properties. The fire investigation had revealed that the electrical problems were related to outdated wiring that had been installed when the building was constructed in 1952. The photographs showed fire investigators examining the damaged electrical systems that would be completely rebuilt during the subsequent renovation of the facility. The Martinez family's decision to purchase and renovate the fire-damaged warehouse had transformed a problem property into a productive business that employed dozens of community members while contributing to neighborhood economic stability. The photographs documented the foundation for this positive transformation. The renovation of the warehouse after the fire had included installation of modern fire suppression systems, updated electrical infrastructure, and improved security measures that addressed the conditions that had made the building vulnerable to both fire and criminal activity. The photographs preserved the evidence that guided these important improvements. Album 1994H contained photographs from the last major case that Detective Harrison had investigated before his retirement in 2003, documenting a series of fraudulent check schemes that had affected elderly residents throughout the metropolitan area. The images showed forged documents, identification materials, and other evidence that had been used to support prosecution of suspects who had targeted vulnerable seniors. The check fraud investigation had required coordination with bank security officials, postal inspectors, and social service agencies that worked with elderly victims who had been traumatized by the financial crimes. The photographs documented evidence that helped recover some stolen funds, while supporting prosecution efforts that prevented future victimization. The elderly victims of the check fraud scheme had included several residents who later participated in community center programs designed to educate seniors about financial security and fraud prevention. The photographs helped document patterns that informed these important educational efforts. Detective Harrison's retirement from the police department had been followed by volunteer work with senior citizen organizations, where he used his investigative experience to help elderly residents avoid becoming victims of financial crimes. The photographs from his final case had inspired his continued commitment to protecting vulnerable community members. Each photograph album in the evidence room contained similar collections of images that had documented moments when individual crises intersected with community response, creating permanent records of both challenges and resilience that characterized life in a small city. The photographs had faded with time, but their historical value had only increased as the community evolved and grew. The evidence room's environmental controls maintained conditions that slowed the deterioration of photographic materials while preserving them for potential future reference. The careful storage reflected understanding that these images represented irreplaceable historical documentation that might prove valuable for purposes that could not be anticipated when the photographs were originally taken. Mrs. Chun's cataloging system included detailed descriptions of each photograph album's contents, with cross-references that connected images to written reports and other evidence materials. Her careful indexing ensured that any photograph could be located quickly if needed for legal proceedings, historical research, or administrative purposes. The faded photographs rested in their climate-controlled environment, their chemical processes slowly transforming urgent documentation into gentle historical artifacts. Each image preserved a moment when community members had faced challenges with courage and cooperation, creating visual testimony to the resilience that characterized life in a place where neighbors helped neighbors through both routine difficulties and extraordinary emergencies. As the night deepened around the police station, the photograph albums continued their patient journey through time, their faded images holding memories of crises overcome in communities, strengthened through shared response to challenges that had tested but not defeated the bonds that connected residents across generations of shared experience. The soft fluorescent lighting in the evidence room cast gentle shadows between the storage shelves, creating an atmosphere where past and present coexisted peacefully. The photographs slept in their protective sleeves, their urgent messages transformed by time into quiet testimony to the ongoing story of community life and the dedicated service of those who had chosen to document and preserve its most challenging moments.